We are on the internet.
Where's the note stock?
Someone could post it in the chat sidebar. If no one has created one, otherwise I will create one. Need to link to it in the.
Oh, my Matrix server is going so slowly today. Matrix.org is killing it by just bombarding it with messages. It's very rude.
I'm going to be impressed if Jitsi holds up.
Why are people just the worst?
They all just hate you, Stuart. Apart from that, everyone's fine.
Yeah, my
it's
Slack
understandable.
My Slack servers had no problems.
Well, it's probably because Slack aren't currently in the middle of being absolutely bombarded by a large spam attack.
So, shall we get proceedings?
Sure, who's running this show?
I was thinking you should, but since I organised it, maybe I should.
Do you want me to run today? You can run tomorrow.
Well, I'll just open up. So,
okay.
Thank you everyone for showing up. It's been I should really plug in my webcam, but it's not going to happen. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully will be the start of a productive couple of days of shorter sessions than our last one. So today we're going to just be recapping what happened last time, the state of SunPy, and then a few updates. Will be done in about 3 hours, give or take. 3 hours. Got the math right. Obviously, Stuart will be, I guess, starting off with. Actually, no, it's actually me first. That was a mistake. But yeah, no, I'll stop rambling. Stuart, you want to say anything?
No. Thank you for organising this and making it happen, because I definitely haven't been paying attention.
So do we want to do the awkward thing of introductions first, or do we just want to assume we all know each other?
Yeah, sure thing. No, let's go around and say hello.
I'll start first then. I'm Nabil. I'm organising this, I guess, and that's pretty much it.
And you're Nabil.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. You're beyond titles.
I was the deputy developer a while back, but that's many years ago now.
And now you're just the SunPy project's Nabil.
Yeah.
I'm Stuart Mumford. I'm lead developer and easily distracted. I'm going to start picking on people, or do you want to start picking on people, Nabil?
I don't want to pick on people, but...
All right, we're going to do this in order that is on my screen. Jack. Jack doesn't want to speak. Jack is Jack.
He's
Laura?
also having internet issues according to my Jitsi.
Cool, yeah. I'm Laura. Yeah, a solar person too. Got involved in SunPy a few years ago, and I've been kind of involved since, and it's been great.
Oh, now I've got a name that I don't recognize and can't pronounce. Miak? Miak? I don't know. I'm just butchering this, presumably, at this point. Okay. Don't want to speak either, or can't. It's fine. Sophie?
Sophie. I've been helping with comms for the past year, and I'm in Dublin with Laura. But not in the same place, obviously, because of, COVID.
Chris? Getting a low hit rate on these introductions here.
Yeah, you don't have to introduce yourself. We don't,
David S. There's no David P, so you just think you're safe.
Hello, I'm David S. If any other Davids turn up. So I've been with SunPy for a few years now. I'm at UCL MSSL, and do a lot of Solar Orbiter stuff day to day. So I guess that's my main interest in SunPy.
Diego.
Hi, I'm Tiago. I work at the University of Oslo. I've been with SunPy for a few years. I don't really have a fancy title, but I run board meetings and I just listen most of the time. That's about it.
Sitting meetings and you know things. Will.
I'm Will. I'm the deputy lead developer for the project. I'm a postdoc here at the Naval Research Lab in DC. Been working on SunPy for, I guess, 4 or 5 more, maybe more years now. But...
Matthew.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, hi, I'm Matt West. I work at Swiri, and I'm co-building the Punch SOC data reduction pipeline, which we're building primarily in Python. I did drop into one of these meetings probably about half a year ago now with the intention to come into them regularly, but sadly I had another meeting scheduled at the same time, which shit happens. Anyway, we kind of want to see what's happening with the SunPy community, because we're going to be relying on SunPy, and ultimately we want the Punch data reduction pipeline to be a SunPy associated package. So that's my interest. That's why I'm here. I keep getting funny low signal thingamajigs, so I may be turning my camera off periodically.
Welcome. Monica?
Hello, I'm Monica Bobra. I'm at Stanford University and vice chair of the board.
Danny? You're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Danny Ryan, who can't unmute. Normally can't stop talking. So thank God for mute buttons. But yeah, anyway, I'm currently at FHNW, or the University of Applied Sciences in Switzerland. I've been with SunPy for many years now, and I'm sort of been involved in starting up a number of affiliated packages, from NDCube, which we'll talk about tomorrow, I think, to SunXpecs for X-ray spectroscopy, and SunRaster for slit, sort of rastering slits, spectrograph instruments, and so on. So I'm kind of like on the fringes and sort of running around doing other things, not so much to do with core. But tomorrow we'll see some of those come to fruition, I hope.
Shane?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Shane. I'm from the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, where Sophie is. I'm also in Dublin, and yeah, kind of a fringe SunPy person. I use it a lot day to day, and like to complain about things when they break and don't work the way I want.
Congratulations. Dias beats Goddard for representation in this meeting. At
long last.
Albert? If he's there, he might not be there.
Can you see me?
I can. And
okay.
he too.
Yeah, well, my car just got done, so I'm out of here. Hi. Albert Shee, Goddard, coordinates maintainer, and curmudgeon at times. I don't know what else to say. Hi, everyone.
Anyone I miss? Chris or Miak? Are you
hey,
there?
Sorry, I butterfingers earlier on the iPad.
Yeah, no worries. Go for it.
I'm Chris. I'm working at Series in Boulder, mostly with the SUBI instrument, and I'm here basically out of interest and because I'm trying to develop either a SUBI Pi or basically a SunKit instrument affiliated package for SUBI. So that's pretty much it.
Cool. Okay. Hi, Jack. You want to go? We can see you now. You're muted though. Hi, Jack. Okay, what's next? What's on the list? Nabil, you're on the list.
Yep. So I'm gonna. I don't know if people have seen the agenda, so we're probably.
Where is the note stock, by the way? Are we putting it on the end of the agenda one, or have we got a new one?
Yeah, it should be. I've actually prepended a note saying to go to the top with the link, but I haven't actually reversed the page to check if it's been posted there.
It just says the link will appear here.
Yeah.
Unless I'm looking at the wrong thing.
No, that's correct. So I'm going to create.
I don't even see that.
It's right up the page. I'm going to create this doc right here, right now. Publish. There we are. I've created a documentation.
I can see the link.
Okay.
Let's see if I share the correct screen or if I actually share.
We have done a bad job of picking like moderators and people to take notes, so we're going to do this now. Oh God, tables. Why?
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, but that's
okay. Does anybody want to volunteer to note take and/or moderate before I start naming people?
I'm happy.
I'm also going to ask if people can see my screen share.
We can.
Yes.
Well, I can.
I'm happy to take notes for the first couple of until the break today.
That would be great. Thank you. I can drive this morning, even though that does mean I have to moderate myself, but I'm sure I can manage. I have like 3 slides, so.
So I'm just going to quickly recap the last meeting from last year. Probably didn't need to say last twice, but so for people who weren't aware, the meeting last year was split across. It was a week, but unlike this week, unlike this week, we are looking at 3 days. We were looking at 3 days, but there were full working days. The idea was obviously going to be in person, and then obviously COVID happened, and so we had like very intense days. I don't know if people who were there last year remember, but so the first day was essentially bringing up everyone onto speed about the state of the SunPy project, and that means not only the library itself, but the affiliated packages. Obviously, we had an introduction, and we went through in quite excruciating detail, I think, of each submodule within SunPy and the state of SunPy. Maybe in a nature that served a in-person meeting, but not necessarily worked on a Zoom call. And then we rounded off the day with, as Danny was mentioning about the spectral stuff, we talked about trying to bring on instrumental teams into the SunPy affiliated package ecosystem. Also talking about the future of SunRaster and NDCube and using that for like ICE data and that kind of thing. Whereas the second day was wrapping up. So this meeting was in the context of ramping up for 2.0, which is a memory ago now. And we were obviously had come off the first main release of SunPy 1.0, where we had defined a bunch of, we tried to fix our API down, or lock it down, sorry. And we were looking at 2.0 going, okay, what do we actually want SunPy to be? What should be in the core package? What do we want? How do we reconcile NDCube and map? And obviously we're going to repeat that topic this year because NDCube, obviously 2.0 was, I guess, a dream back then. Would that be accurate to say?
It's just been really slow is all, really.
And obviously NDCube 2.0 is much closer to release than it was a year ago.
It better be.
I think
And
it's fair to say that the last time there were a lot more obstacles, and there was more aspiration only because there were more obstacles to overcome, and it was further away. I think it is definitely fair to say we're a lot closer now, even if it has been a bit slow.
And so we also talked about how to organize SunPy as a project going forwards. Steve, who unfortunately can't be here, created the roadmap repo that probably should be deleted. If I'm honest, I don't think we've used that. But one of the things we identified as a project was that we weren't planning. Obviously, partly because it's very difficult for a project based off volunteer work and no money to plan work in like chunks of time. But we wanted to try and encapsulate a future vision of SunPy that would allow people to come in and go, okay, maybe this might be interesting to work on, etc. like that. And probably didn't pan out that. And we spent some time working on the vision statement. And I don't know if anyone remembers if we put that anywhere.
In a PR to the SEP repo that I just posted into the coordination meeting matrix chat.
I was going to say, because maybe that should go on the website.
Well, I mean,
once
probably go revive it and discuss it a bit, but.
And I think this is the day we also we hashed out the affiliated package. So, as some others have mentioned, we have an affiliated package system that allows either people to be sponsored directly by the SunPy project, or if they want to be external from the SunPy project and they have control, but get the branding like AAPI. We actually, before this meeting, had no formal system for it, and so
I think we finalized that at PyAstro, or was that the other way around? I can't remember what order those two things happened in.
I feel like it was the other way around.
Maybe we drafted it all at PyAstro and agreed it. I
think it was finalized at PyAstro because PyAstro was after. Okay. I think maybe.
But I didn't show up for PyAstro, but I remember hashing out.
I mean, we did chat a lot about it. I think what we did at PyAstro was actually write it all.
Yeah.
And so that was I guess one of the big outcomes of that meeting was a lot of the work around that. And then the final day was a lot of infrastructure tooling, talking about how we actually maintain the project. There was the obviously the very interesting results from the survey that I think we want to keep doing every so often now. I don't know if there are plans to repeat that.
We probably should repeat it. Yearly is probably a bit too much, but it has been a while since we did it now. The most amusing thing that I saw that came out of this survey, this is just slightly off topic quickly, was the SSW IDL talk at AAS SPD a few weeks ago, quoted the statistics from the SunPy survey, so that made me happy.
Well, I feel like the SunPy survey is probably the most extensive survey. I'm not aware of any other surveys. I feel like there should be more work. I feel like SPD and those kind of talks, those workshops would be a great time to survey people.
The survey took way longer than it should have done and was way more work than I was expecting it to be. But
I'm not saying.
I was just going to say, if anybody has the desire to repeat it at some point in the future, then let us know, and we can point you in the right direction at the very least.
And I think we wrapped off the day talking about. I guess our biggest problem as a project is a community trying to bring on a larger community around the project. Solar physics is ultimately a very small niche within quite a large field, and I guess that means that we haven't really onboarded the amount of people that we would really like to kind of allow others to work in their spare time, like for fun, on the project. So I think overall we had a fun time. I remember being very tired by the end of it. 8 hours of Zoom calls is surprisingly tiring in a different way than an in-person meeting. Oh, wrong tab. So I have a bunch of takeaways that when I look back on, and obviously if people want to bring up their own, that go ahead. So obviously it was the first time we've done this, and with the time you always do a first one event of anything, there's always a learning curve, and you learn on the job essentially. And obviously the big thing was that COVID changed it from an in-person meeting, and obviously when everything was planned, the schedule was planned, everything was scoped out in an in-person meeting, everyone was there, you had the ability to break out into small rooms and things and just iterate on like talks and work in a way that you wouldn't be able to do in an online call. It was a lot more informational. So as I'm specifically alluding to like some of my talks was that like example, I talked about a lot on the Wednesday about our continuous integration and our project template, and it was a lot more informational than you might argue that these talks should have been. Is that one of the, I guess, a lot of people, you bring everyone in, and what you want is things to be iterated on and something to be worked out. I guess it's not often we do this. We have our weekly community calls, but there's a handful of people and we kind of decide whatever. But the point about bringing everyone in is that we can make like decisions and try and steer things in a way that we can't on a weekly basis for the project. And so I guess like things like my talk were just like informational for the most part, and probably wasn't the most useful necessarily for these for this style of meeting. And I guess the biggest one was we had a lot of arguments about, I'm not going to say everything, but we had a lot of arguments about, say, how to do authorship in code, maybe how we want to do documentation, how we want to do package templating, and a lot of this, I've reread all the the notes we had from last, and there wasn't like a lot of like, okay, this maybe should be on a GitHub issue, or it should be somewhere else, so someone can come back to this in say 6 months' time and act on it in a manner. We might have talked about X, Y, and Z, but no consensus was brought, no consensus was written down. And much like the vision statement from last year, I forgot about it until I was looking at the looking through the notes, and what happened to that? And things like that, I guess I want to try and hope that we can formulate something by the end of each session that allows someone in say 2 months to work on SunPy or something related to SunPy.
I think we did discuss a lot of things last year that we didn't necessarily make as much action on as would have liked or stuff, but I think there were things that we discussed last year that definitely did happen and did come out of it. The affiliated package thing being the biggest one, and the SunKit instruments coming into existence came out of the coordination meeting last year, and those two are just the two that I can think of off the top of my head. And I feel like a lot of the infrastructure conversations we had last year fed into the NASA grant proposal we put in whenever that was. So, I mean, I think we need to do a bit of a better job of documenting some of our decisions. And I think last year we had a bunch of technical conversations that didn't necessarily lead to a firm conclusion, but I think they did do a good job of kind of getting everybody talking and thinking along the same lines for things. So
Jack also made a good point in the chat that, I mean, since our coordination meeting last year, that the world has changed pretty dramatically. I think that has obviously distracted a lot of people in various ways, and especially career-wise. I think that's made it hard to kind of take action on a lot of the things that came out of that meeting.
That is a talk for later.
Okay. Well, I have a few slides on
Oh, stop sharing.
I have a few slides on what happened in the last year. See whether this works. Can you see this okay?
Yep.
Along the lines of the pandemic setting the world on fire. What do you mean it's 2021 already? I did the obligatory run of statistics through the core repo. With some rudimentary filtering, we have 492 not backport PRs merged in the last 12 months. 21 different contributors, over 1,000 non-merge commits. We've closed nearly 300 issues and opened less. We are minus 40 issues in the last 12 months, which made me happy. And of the 258 that we've opened in the last 12 months, we've also closed 167 of them.
Is that a record year?
I don't know because I haven't got the historical stats, but I am impressed that we're minus 40 issues. That's good going.
I just wanted to thank David because David's been working on a lot of triaging of old issues and bugs, and so that's why a lot of that's been, that's happened.
Yeah. I'm just going to move this over here. Yeah, and I think 21 contributors isn't to be sniffed at either. I'm quite pleased with that as a number. Obviously, there's a pretty long tail there, but still,
that's not new, right? That's just total contributors, not new.
That's total contribute. That's people with commits in the last 12 months.
And just a core, right?
Just a core, yep. Picking through the changelog and release notes, the major things that changed, not in order of majorness. I think probably the biggest single change we made was in 2.1, where we added metadata only support to Fido and massively refactored unified response to be table responses. It's certainly the most disruptive change, but I think it was also one of the better ones in terms of like user experience and flexibility of how Fido works. The coordinate aware plotting stuff, including image alignment and contours and everything that made it into 3.0 at the last minute, was a pretty major jump forward for that as well. Change tracking to .meta or map was a very nice and relatively simple change with nice, like, the small amount of code, large impact change to be able to see what map and you have changed in the meta since you loaded it from the file. JSOC cutout support is nice as long as JSOC don't break their API, which has only happened once, so could be worse. And the all-important assume spherical screen in coordinates for when you want to assume that you're looking out onto the inside of sphere. Oh, it's too long, apparently. As a list of our sponsored packages from the website, as we've already mentioned, NDCube is rapidly approaching 2.0. Unlike core, NDCube is still stubbornly sticking to a semantic versioning scheme. So 2.0 is going to be a major API break. It's at this point rapidly a complete rebuild from the ground up. We've pretty much thrown away most things and made it work with AstroPy 8.14 WCSs and rebuilt the API. So there's an open SEP. If you have thoughts on interacting with multidimensional data, please go there and add comments. Sun raster.
And more on that tomorrow, just for everyone's awareness.
Oh wait, I've put the sun raster thing and I've put Sunkit image. This is supposed to be the sun raster thing. I've got my things all in the wrong order. Sun raster got Solar Orbiter / Spy support and then has gone a bit quiet. Sunkit image had one PR from Will and not a huge amount else in the way of features, I think.
Yeah, that'd be fair. Will added time lag support, and we got a PR that updates the ASDA swirl detection algorithm that I need to fix.
Sunkit instruments came into existence in the last 12 months. Shane has been working on Radio Spectra because I've been seeing the GitHub notifications, not sure about the details of what's been going on there. We don't have a session where we're going through this, right?
No, this is...
Do you want to give...
Actually, there is... I think a bit... No, there is...
I'm doing an overview of affiliated packages on Wednesday,
okay.
But I mean, I think this is all good to do.
Well, won't go into too much detail then. PyFLCT exists. The hard part of that is done, which was wrapping the C code and making the C code compile. So if anybody wants to do velocity fields from images and wants to write the nice high level bits to make that return cubes and be nicer, the difficult bit is done. And last but by no means least, the ablog package exists, and dear God, how is that so popular? We get so many issues and contributions to ablog, which is our Sphinx plugin for blogging with Sphinx, which we use on our SunPy.org website. And Nabil soldiers on looking after that and dealing with the contributions and the bug fixes like a hero.
All I'm saying is, if you want to start a website and you want to blog, ablog is there for you.
Ablog is there for you if you are a little bit crazy and want to use Sphinx.
And not like any of the other Python
solutions. Not any of the other 27,000 static site generators that exist. That's pretty much all I had for that. Anybody got anything else they think has happened in the last 12 months that's worthy of calling out that I've forgotten? Because I feel like one of the things that's happened in the last 12 months is I've been paying less attention than I have in previous 12 months.
So I guess I would want to bring up slightly that obviously we've been running GSOC every year. The Google Summer of Code, for people who aren't aware, where we get Google to pay students to write code for us. And last year, a lot of the network for Fido was done through that project. And this year we are working on two separate projects, one for IndieCube, I think on resampling, if I'm...
reprojecting.
That's right.
And resampling.
Reprojecting, yeah. You say reproject, I say reproject, resample. And the other one is working on, with David, 3D plotting for PyVista. So you can plot your images of the sun with field lines in 3 dimensions. And the other thing I want to bring up is that we also ran a outreachy project on benchmarking. So one of the things in SunPy we haven't really looked into is properly making sure our code isn't slow. And with outreachy, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that we don't introduce massive performance regressions randomly.
Yeah, so we've never actually checked to see how bad our patches are, and a lot of the work was done, and I just need to finish off that, and then we can start writing benchmarks.
Yeah, unfortunately, that project got well and truly COVIDed.
Yeah,
right in the face, because the student who was working on it caught COVID halfway through the project and basically wiped her out. So,
yeah, so it's waiting on me just to finish.
Such is 2020.
Yeah, we're very close to. I need to sit down and also fix AstroPy's benchmarking repo as well.
Yeah.
That's everything I can think of, at least targeted at the core repo.
We're just going to do a sub package update. Do you want to do a sub package update, Will?
Yes, I do. Sorry if my headphones drop out at some point. Sometimes they misbehave for whatever reason.
By the way, when you start sharing your screen, if you click the video button again, your video turns up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen share.
I noticed that happened with yours. I was confused. Wait, if I click it again. Oh, okay. Interesting. All right, can everyone still see that?
Yep.
Yes, okay. All right, so I'm going to do a quick overview of the sub packages and what the current state of them. So this will probably be honestly less than 15 minutes, but feel free to jump in, interrupt me at any point. Okay, so here's our list of sub packages and the kind of current health status of them. This took me a while to find on the website, but this is I can't remember what even page it's on. Nabil had to link it to me yesterday. This is somewhere in the docs, and it basically gives the kind of status of each one of our sub packages currently. So basically, blue, green, good, yellow, less stable. So you notice like for coordinates, very stable things like map, net, time series, the things that we rely on, the things that people probably use the most out of the package, reasonably stable, doing pretty well. Things like IO, data, stuff that's like tends to be less user facing, pretty mature, not a lot going on there. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of step through the major components here: coordinates, net, map, time series, and then kind of point out some additions or changes in the past year since the last coordination meeting, and kind of talk about those. And I'll summarize some of the other packages as well. So Stuart touched on this a little bit too. But I just wanted to point out that we've had 3 sub packages that have been removed and or deprecated and will be removed in 3.1. So the big one obviously is Instra, that is now SunKit Instruments. It's been deprecated in version 3 and will be removed in 3.1. Nabil had a big PR that removed all of the Instra code, and so all this lives in SunKit Instruments now, with the idea being that for people who weren't kind of part of that discussion last year, that the instrument-specific functionality that sort of can't justify its own package necessarily, or maybe the things that an instrument team doesn't necessarily want to maintain themselves, that stuff goes into SunKit Instruments. So a lot of those goes routines, the Fermi GBM stuff that is now in SunKit Instruments. AIA prep, which was a heavily used function in probably the most used function, I would guess, in the Instra sub package, is now part of AIA Pi and has actually been removed, was removed in version 2.1 because it was deprecated earlier. And so now this lives under the AIA Pi calibrate.register and essentially provides the exact same functionality. It's the same function, more or less. And we're hoping that this kind of gives, in addition to removing it from core and narrowing the scope of core, the idea being that this provides a way for people to kind of dump now their more instrument specific code, and hopefully makes that process easier than having to go the route of putting it into core. The ROI subpackage has been deprecated and also will be removed in version 3.1. I have never used this, so I can't really say exactly what the utility of this is here. I don't think it's been used by many people in a long time. But the AstroPi regions affiliated package is one possible alternative to this. And I think the most useful bit of functionality in there was the chain code that's now in net under Helio. Lastly, and probably the most minor change is that the color maps, the CM subpackage is now part of the visualize subpackage under visualize color maps, and was removed in version 2.1. So since our last coordination meeting, we've managed to deprecate and or remove 3 of these sub packages.
The one thing I'd add about the SunKit instruments package is I would be excited if at some point in the future it actually acts as an incubator. So I think once things go in there, if it matures to a point where it now does merit its own package with somebody or a group of people willing to maintain it, then things should be able to be moved out of that. I think that was one of the things that it was envisaged to be when it's set up, as well as those things you said, Will. But as far as I'm aware, that has not yet happened. It's only been less than a year.
I agree. Yeah, that would also be great. I don't think we've really seen, I could be wrong, and Nabil can correct me because he's been the one babysitting that one the most, but I don't know that we've seen any contributions to that package at all.
Sorry, just to interrupt, you mean, sorry, I was typing a message and I can't multitask. You mean SunKit Instruments?
SunKit Instruments, yeah.
So we, I forget his name. There was I think a Swiss guy who was adding functionality for, was it RESI? Something to do with RESI sources?
Yes, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
I forget what it was.
Yeah, it was the HSI fits to map functionality and SSW was put into the RESI instrument package here.
That's right. That PR is still open, I believe. I think we had a lot of back and forth on that.
Yeah, like I think this is just something like this. What Danny said, like we haven't advertised that's what we want it to be, and maybe that's something we need to do. Looking in the future.
Yeah, and maybe because that's a much lower barrier, a much lower hurdle to get over for people than like the affiliated package to say like, okay, you have a function or a few functions that you want to add, rather than it's much easier to put PR into an existing repo than it is to say, okay, start your own affiliated package, for your particular instrument or whatever. So maybe we need to be pushing that along when we do more of our affiliated package advertisement too, to say, if you have kind of a smaller subset of functionality, here's an easier way to at least get started. Like Danny was saying, like the incubator idea.
David opened a issue on the SunPy org repo earlier about moving like how to become an affiliated package further up the affiliated package page. Maybe that is also worth adding there.
Yeah, I'm planning on bringing up that when I talk about what we need to do to improve the entire system.
Sure.
Yeah.
Need to write that talk.
Yeah, I think that's probably a discussion we could have at the affiliated package stuff on that's Wednesday. Is about what can we do better to kind of attract specifically instrument sub packages, and maybe there's people in this meeting that could give us some good feedback about how we could do a better job of that.
And just to hijack a bit more, the PRs to SunKit Instrument were merged in and have been released. So that work has been, that RESI addition to instruments was merged in and released. So.
Oh, it has. Oh, good, great.
Yeah, just to say, if you do open a PR to any of the ones that I have rare access to, I generally am relatively quick and will control your PR into a releasable state and release the update. That's the Nabil promise.
Yes, the SunPy project's Nabil. We'll press the merge button. You have been warned.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through just very briefly the kind of our four main sub packages and just kind of advertise the sort of couple new things about them. So, and Albert can interrupt me if I'm forgetting anything or I'm saying anything wrong here. So in coordinates, at least the ones that make nice pictures are rotated sun frame, which came out in version 2. Which essentially provides a meta coordinate frame for using reproject to do differential rotation. So these are the differentially rotated heliographic coordinates or lines of latitude here that I'm showing on the left, and this is from the gallery. Both these are from the gallery. There's also the assumed spherical screen, which Stuart briefly mentioned. This is also from a gallery example for pretending that the sky is a spherical screen. Some kind of more lower level details. The Carrington and Stonyhurst heliographic frames now have a commonly inherit from a base heliographic class, which changed some details about how they're instantiated, and that Carrington is now an observer-dependent frame. And so there's a lot more kind of lower level changes too in the coordinate stack, and the changelog, our changelog details all of those. But these are just some of the big ones.
So I'll point out two things. One, that white band on the right-hand side on that plot is now fixed, now that I understand what was causing it. And so I actually don't know which release it's in or whether it's still just on master, but it is now fixed. And the other thing I'll point out that is not shown up on this slide, at least, is a velocity support in coordinates. So now there's velocity support formally, and the informal support that was hidden before was giving the wrong answer anyway. So hopefully no one was relying on it. But velocities are now supported, but they're a little tricky to work with. The SunPy framework is not the most friendly for that. So you kind of have to know what you're doing, but it's supported if you want to work with velocities.
Thanks. Was the velocity support in 2.1 or is that in 3?
I think it's 2.1. I think.
The changelog is there if anyone wants to double check. Okay.
One other comment, just jump in there. The rotated sun frame, I think you mentioned that it's useful for reproject, which it absolutely is, but especially with the coordinate-aware plotting support now that we have in map, you don't even have to call reproject, although it is generally a performance hit to do it the other way. Reproject is faster all around. But some of the stuff that if people are paying attention on the repo or some of the stuff that hasn't yet been merged in, but you can not even call reproject and get a lot of the different rotation and other things happening.
Awesome.
That's it.
All right, for net, I realize that I'm not watching the chat because I'm in full screen. So if there's stuff coming up in the chat, someone relevant to this, please shout at me.
Speaking of the chat, quickly, we have at least a few people watching on the stream. So if you can use the Matrix channel instead of the built-in Jitsi chat, so that people who are watching the YouTube can see the questions as well, that would be great. But if it's just quick chat, then whatever. I'm not going to worry too much.
Okay, for net, Stuart mentioned a few of these. One of the big ones in 2.0 that Nabil put a ton of effort into was the search attribute discovery. So you can do things like either autocomplete on attributes to see what options you have. So an example, like if you do instrument and then dot, and if you're in a notebook or in an IPython shell, it will tab complete to the available instruments that you can search with Fido. You can also print out. This also works if you there's string representations for a lot of these as well. Or if you do things like printing sunpy.net.fido, it tells you the available clients. So details like this that have made sort of discovering what data is available through Fido much easier. And so this works on kind of any case where you have sort of a finite set of possibilities. So this, like for physobs or for instruments, this is really nice and makes searching for data much easier and much more user friendly. The other one that Stuart mentioned was the metadata search and the kind of unifying the API for data and metadata searches. So you can do things like combining an HEK, and in this example, this is from the gallery, a JSON query. So for example, like if you wanted to look for observations, flare observations that were coincident with certain HEK features, and you wanted to have the magnetograms for the corresponding magnetogram observations for those results. You can now do that through this, and this was a GSOC project last year. Included in that project was also a huge refactor of generic client, which also included a lot of changes to Scraper. And then, as Stuart mentioned, now we have an API to the JSOC cutout service, so you can request cutouts through Fido. There's now a cutout attribute. Map. So last year during the coordination meeting, Albert, I think, almost fully implemented all of the interactive quick look stuff that we have for maps. So this is, if you print this, I guess this works in a notebook by just printing straight to the notebook. It also works somehow in a shell, I believe. Is that correct?
I think if you do .quicklook as a method on map, it pops it in a browser, I want to say.
Yeah. And so you have these nice interactive, or it gives you sort of a better quick look on the data than something like Peak. Say you get a lot of your metadata information. You get a histogram of your counts, and then if you click this, it will swap between, I think, a coordinate or like world coordinates and pixel coordinates. There's also draw quadrangle, which replaced draw rectangle in 3.0. So draw rectangle has been deprecated, which allows you to draw quadrangles along particular lines of heliographic latitude. So this is an example from our gallery. We also, I think David added map sources for MBI and HMI synoptic magnetograms in 2.1. I had a PR that added the EUI map source, and that's in 3.0. I think Albert mentioned that now we have the coordinate. I forgot to add this on here, but we have coordinate aware plotting, so you can do things like stuff like the auto align functionality, where you can overplot maps with different WCSs. This is included in 3.0, and this uses sort of p-color mesh as the underlying function for plotting data rather than mshow, which is what we've used in the past. I don't know if Stuart or Albert wanted to say anything more about that functionality, but that is a big change, and something that I think a lot of people have requested and or thought that was already in SunPy for a long time. Okay, then time series has not had a ton of changes. One of the big ones was Laura worked on adding support for the new GOES netcdf files, and that was included in 2.1. And so there was an addition in net to also be able to query these files from the new NOAA source, and now we can read these netcdf files as well, and there's adjusted the time series source for XRS to account for the new data format and to account for changes between 13, 14, 15, and then the GOES 16, 17 data. There just some minor changes that we now support the new JSON files for the indices and predict indices. David has recently put in a bunch of work in a refactor of the time series factory, which that PR is still open, so I think that will be probably going to 4.0. And then there's been some discussion around possibly replacing our underlying data structure for time series, going from a pandas data frame to AstroPy table. I know this is still very early and very uncertain, but I know there's been some discussion at our weekly meetings about that. So very quickly, I know I'm running up against the break. So database steward is going to, this is sort of the remaining sub packages we have. Database steward's going to talk about, and we're going to have a discussion on about Thursday. I don't know if you want to say anything about that now.
I'd forgotten I was going to talk about that on Thursday, and now I'm going to have to think about it for the next couple of days. That's
okay. You have 4 days to do it. Image has not seen a ton of activity. I think Jack and I are the maintainers for this sub package. There's probably there's maybe some things that could be moved to SunKit image. I think that's a discussion that we could have. Maybe some parts that could be replaced with Reproject. I would say the biggest kind of part of image that we've had to deal with lately is dealing with affine transform. So for people that aren't aware, there's a PR that would allow for basically a more flexible interface to switching out the backend for what package is doing the affine transform. So you could use something like CuPy or Dask for the kind of underlying the computational workload. So you could do this on a GPU, or you could parallelize it. And that PR has been open for a while, and there's probably a discussion that needs to be had about that as well, about what exactly the API for that looks like. I don't really have much to say about I/O. There doesn't seem to have been a lot of activity there. If I'm wrong, people should jump in and tell me. SunPy physics seems to exclusively exist to hold the differential rotation code and nothing else. And I'm not really sure why we have a subpackage called SunPy physics. And I think maybe we need to revisit this, possibly renaming it, or think about, especially after our upcoming unit refactor of how differential rotation, how that function works. What in the case of rotated sunframe, maybe think about deprecating this subpackage too. Sun holds constants, and we have a few models for things like density and temperature, and as a function of radius, like through the sun. And this, one thought here is that I think we could think about renaming this to just a constant subpackage and get rid of the models in there. I'm not sure who's maintaining these and when they were put in there, but that's just some thoughts. Time seems to be pretty stable. Util is mostly kind of obviously internal tools that we've been using, and I don't know much about visualization either, but anyone should feel free to jump in and talk about that too.
The biggest upcoming change to visualization is it's likely that all of the animator code that exists in visualization is going to be moved out into a new package.
Okay.
But that hasn't happened yet. I don't think there's been much, there haven't been any PRs or anything closed recently, but there are those plans that Stuart mentioned.
Yeah, I don't want to hijack because
we're out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. But what's the plan? Why are we moving visualization out? Is this something to have? Is this a discussion to have later?
Briefly, NDCube needs the animators but doesn't want a SunPy dependency.
Would that not necessitate that moving that into NDCube instead?
That was one thought.
That was one of the options, but I'm leaning a little bit towards a separate package, but we can discuss that somewhere else.
Sure.
The main, again, very quickly, the main thinking behind that was the realization that these animator classes have inherent use, sort of independent of both potentially have use independent of NDCube or SunPy core.
I mean, the animator stuff is sufficiently generic that you could use it for anything outside of astronomy or solar physics. So there is some logical justification for them being a standalone package.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't think much has happened inside visualization. There was some tidy up. They, to be honest, could probably do with a bit of love, because I bet a bunch of the map stuff in there is no longer really needed.
Yeah, just also IO I think needs some love, and probably need to think about it more if we're thinking about time series.
Yeah, IO
very
needs
well.
love in terms of it needs a plan to remove it.
Yeah.
I think that leads well into this slide, which is my last slide. It's just to say that I think we need to think about maintainers for all of our sub packages and revisiting this list. I think this may be a little stale. So like we were just saying, so IO does not have formally any sub package maintainers. Database doesn't either, but maybe after Thursday we'll see if that matters at all. There's quite a few of these with only one maintainer, and maybe that's okay. And maybe I think we need to sort of, if the people who are the single maintainers for these sub packages, they need extra help. Do we want to have two people? And kind of more broadly, what is the point of having sub package maintainers? Are we actually adhering to these roles or not? I think that's maybe something we need to think about. Or do we need to redistribute these responsibilities? I don't know. So I don't have any firm conclusions for this slide, just to say that I think we had maybe a certain sort of forgotten about these roles, and do we need to revisit them, and I don't know, and think about which of these really needs two people on it. So that is all I have.
Step in and say, Stuart, might be something worth talking about when you're talking about the project overhaul, project governance, and this part.
Yeah, maybe. I was going a bit higher level than that, but yeah.
Or I might then pencil myself in on that day. Then I'll talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to think about in terms of roles for the project and how we want to kind of dole those out.
Yeah, if we have, well, let's see how it goes this afternoon, shall we? Maybe we could talk about that later.
So maybe it's a bit too soon for a break, but whereas now a 15-minute break if people want to. Well, I mean, it's on the schedule, but
I could use a break.
If you want a 15-minute break, so we'll come back. What is that? What is 7 plus 15? 22.
Say 20 past.
Yeah, so we'll come back in 20 past, and we will carry on after that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Hello.
Live streaming is on.
It's on.
In one way, like the last coordination meeting feels like years ago, and then another way, it feels like it was just last month.
Yeah, it feels so long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was very impressed by all the lists of stuff we've done since then, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't really realize how much stuff we've managed to add in like the last year and a bit.
I'm looking forward to an in-person one at some point again, though.
Yeah. And now everyone's in Europe.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah.
No. Let's keep it the East Coast.
The East Coast of Ireland?
East Coast of Ireland it is.
Perfect.
Split the difference and go for Reykjavik or something.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Just get out of Ireland for a while.
There is no out of Ireland. Don't be silly. All right. Who wants to take notes and who wants to moderate this afternoon? I'm saying this afternoon. It's really just post-break. Silence.
I was going to say
I don't mind carrying on with notes.
Cool. Well, I mean, I can carry on moderating. We can do it based on day if you want. I guess it's not particularly long. But we are rotating around.
Yeah, I probably want different moderators and note takers tomorrow because obviously since David is talking a lot tomorrow and so is Stuart.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it tomorrow. Yeah. I can take.
I'll do one of them tomorrow as well.
Cool. Sophie then.
Hello. Let me see if I can share this. I've tried it on Jitsi, I think. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh, amazing. Hang on, I'll try that video thing.
I enjoy that now David's put the Pride logo on the website.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
I had to use it. I mean, we only
So
have a couple
good.
more days, so
Yeah.
has to keep coming up every year now for sure. Okay, so I only have a couple of slides because obviously communications in a global pandemic is a lack of communications in a global pandemic. But first, a community announcement. I have officially left solar physics again, and I mean it this time. So I've moved on from my research fellow role. So I'm still at Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, but I'm now working in more of a project management role. So I won't be doing you know, writing my own proposals for research or writing publications or doing, you know, solar physics conferences or anything like that anymore. I'll be helping everyone else in the section with all their different research projects and helping manage them and promote them and stuff like that. So definitely not going back. This is it. I'm sticking with the project management. But it does mean I'm resigning all my solar roles. So I'm going to slowly fade into the background for pretty much most of them. But I will lurk. I'm a good lurker. So if you ever need help with comm stuff, I will always be around. But I just want to have as much time as I used to. Not saying I've really had much time in the first place, but even less than I did before. So I obviously started helping. I mean, you know, obviously I've been using SunPy for such a long time, but really only helping with the comms at the beginning of last year, which was a terrible time to start something because obviously COVID hit. And very much a less is more approach with comms, I think, and education and stuff in general in 2020, just because it sort of disappeared in the blink of an eye. And I think everyone was very much focused on, you know, staring at COVID stats for the first few months and then realizing, oh, I have to get used to remote working, so I better do some prep for that. And I think anything that wasn't that sort of focus or wasn't related to real world events was very much kind of put aside. So less was more from an education and communications point of view for any research projects. I do think, you know, obviously lots of different things got sort of cancelled and postponed conference-wise, which is where you get to promote these sorts of things. Things did start to pick up and we started getting more remote conferences. About the rest of these, they definitely then began a sort of a Zoom saturation point. So there was almost like too many online conferences, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So you do have to be very careful when you're targeting promotion for this sort of stuff to not oversaturate. So yeah, I'm very glad this is Jitsi today because it's not another Zoom meeting. Yay! This is like a nice change. It looks different on my screen for a change. But saying that, I did obviously manage to get to a lot of different online meetings and talk to people about SunPy and what they're interested in, what they think of it. And it was quite interesting. And I think now is actually a really good time to reflect on promoting the project and who your target audience is and who are the best people to reach out to and tell people about the project. Because for me, just chatting to people at poster sessions and just general meetings and stuff, there's actually a lot of enthusiasm out there for SunPy. It's seen, you know, particularly from early career people, postgrads and postdocs use it all the time in all their research. But then you get to the question of, do you want to get involved? And then people aren't, you know, necessarily as forthcoming with that. And mainly because just from what people have been saying is that it's very much not related to their specific research projects that they're working on. You know, there's not a spare time there for code projects rather than really basic research things. Or there's a mindset of maybe perhaps some of their supervisors, it's not necessarily the best thing to devote their time to. So there's definitely a mindset change there that needs to take place. I think there's a load of enthusiastic people, but we need to find ways to get them involved in a lighter sense, and maybe that'll help the community be a bit more kind of trustworthy of code development stuff and devote more time and funding to it, you know, within their own research projects. So I really liked the SPD meeting stuff that you guys did. Laura was saying that there was, you know, lots of different people there, and particularly some of the, you know, the people who would supervise the early career or people who would write those grant projects. You know, so they are really good people to target to try and change that mindset as to how, you know, SunPy might be useful for them. So it's something to definitely think about in terms of promoting it, I think, going forward. Very much all I pretty much did you know, through a lot of 2020 was just like tweeting and stuff like that, because you had to keep that light approach. You don't want to, you know, annoy people when they really want to think about COVID and stuff like that. Interesting looking at the stats. I love looking at stats these days. It's mad because I used to hate stats when I was a student and now I'm obsessed. But so this is sort of, if you can see this sort of trend here, this is the profile visits for the Twitter account for pretty much most of 2020. There's a massive increase when I went on a bit of a spate of following loads of solar physicists in October. So that's why you see the increase. It didn't necessarily mean that they followed us back, but they did like pique their interest for a split second to like click on our profile visit. But there's also a few other interesting peaks, and they're very much surrounded by project updates or events that were happening with SunPy. So around here in springtime, there was, of course, the survey, which was really, really, I think the community were fascinated by that. And I seen it pop up and mentioned loads of different times in other talks. I think people kind of getting a sense of where we are in terms of using Python and SunPy have been really, really useful. So I know you were talking about that earlier. I think it's a really good thing to do again. Maybe not this year. Wait till people are a little bit or back to whatever normal is. Maybe next year think about doing it, because I think that would be a good, a couple of years difference between the two stats. So yeah, that really picked up. And then SunPy 2.0 as well. So that was something that, just general project updates, whenever they happen, people do actually click and read those documents, which is great. So people are following along with what's happening with SunPy. Also, this massive peak was more to do with the scientists, the users of SunPy. This was, when you were running the Ask Us Anything event, so people were clicking on it, and then people were talking about how they use SunPy on Twitter. And if you look at the top tweets and the top mentions, I think it's really important to kind of see what those two top ones are, because it kind of highlights it's the project updates, but it's also the users. So the top mention was Laura when she did that really cool visualization stuff, and it got loads and loads of people looking at the Twitter profile. And so you can post project updates and events and stuff, but I think a really key thing with this sort of stuff is, and it might be a way to get more people involved, is to help promote the stuff that other people are working on. So promoting SunPy user output, so they get something out of SunPy, they reference it and they use it, they get promoted as well. And so it's something to think about. I think it could be a new way of taking sort of a more hands-on approach with the community and getting them involved. The one thing that's been sort of talked about in more recent times in loads of different projects is the concept of nuggets. And I'm always shy away from them because I think they're a lot of effort. And I very much think Twitter was more of a bigger thing in the pandemic era because blogs just take absolutely ages to write. And you do I think you think about them more and their wording than if you just sent off a really quick tweet. That might only take a couple minutes. If you sat and did a blog post, you'd really think about it a lot more. And I think it takes more time on the creator's point of view to do it. But it is something that the community understands. So if it's understandable concept for solar scientists, that's not a bad thing. To do something like it, and it is very much ingrained, whether it's, HMS or RSI instrument stuff or actual solar physics or other different communities as well. So one thing I thought might be kind of a cool thing to do, something like a Twitter thread. So if someone has just published a paper using SunPy and we see its reference, we ask them, would you like to post a little story? And then you could just do something like unroll, and then it converts into a blog post. So for those who aren't, because we can't focus everything on Twitter, you can then put it on the website for longevity in a blog post as well. So it unrolls into a longer post. Just something to sort of say, thanks for using it. We're really interested in your work. And it'll open up a discussion then for people to talk about how they're using it and maybe get a bit more help and involvement. So something to think about. I think don't focus obviously everything on social media because everyone is not on social media, but at least you can use them as a tool to then also provide content for website blogs and stuff like that as well for those who aren't there. So it's something to think about. I think comms is easy, and I think anyone can do comms, but I would definitely say in terms of a communication and education role, one thing I definitely noticed in the past year is that I definitely do more comms in education, and probably because I'm not as involved in the code development side of things. I think you need someone who really understands the code base in order to run, say, a tutorial or something like that. But I also think that you need someone with excellent understanding of the code base, you need someone with teaching ability and the time and the energy to do it. So often the developers don't really have that time, right? Because you're volunteering your own time to work on it. So to me, it comes back to the inevitable problem of funding. So it's something to think long term as to, I think we should think about where is the really best way to target the education, because I think people's time is limited and it's not easy to get education funding. My general experience is that education funding grants will give you the money for workshop materials and stuff like that, but not necessarily salary time. So something to think about. How important is running a tutorial as a side to a conference there's a big week-long, summer school or something like that, I think make sure you target your time and not try to spread yourselves too thinly with like every single invite that comes up. And yeah, I saw that funding was the next thing on the list, so it's definitely something to think about. I know I'm always keeping an eye out for these things. Sometimes there are little pots of money for these kinds of things, and that can help you to run workshops and stuff like that. So that might help long term. So yeah, that's it. That's just some thoughts I had about the comms and the education and what we could do in the future. Very much, I think, trying to get more people involved has to be trying to see what they can get out of it as well. From the discussions I've had with people, just showing their supervisors or whoever their grant funders are that it's a useful thing to do. I'm gonna hijack this because I just posted this job ad this morning. So I did want to say we're hiring at the moment, and maybe the person who gets this job could help with SunPy as well. So we have, we host DIAS. At DIAS we host Solar Monitor. So we're hiring for a research software developer. So if anybody on the call knows anyone who's interested, please send this in to them, because we'd love to get someone who's a little bit more into the code development side of things. So yeah, questions?
I don't have a question, but I have something that I noticed is, that Matplotlib Twitter account, and recently they've been plotting out little nuggets of like, oh, you can use this cool thing to do, like, the thing where you can use letters to do the layout of the figure.
Yeah.
Maybe we should start trying to do little things like that, like just little tweets showing here's what a differentially rotated map looks like, or
exactly
like a GIF showing the autocomplete of the Fido stuff. Like, I don't think people know that exists. I think if we could advertise that, you get people involved, because it's kind of hidden, but it's really, really cool and really powerful. So
I often, whenever I don't get to meetings as much as I like, but whenever I'm in a meeting, I think someone is always saying, oh, that's something that probably people don't know about. We should do something about that. But I think people don't really have the time to do something about it. So maybe something like a quick tweet might actually be a good starting point to highlight something, and then it starts off a conversation with someone in the community about it,
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say as well, so if you're based on like the Twitter things and how to get it into a blog post, like this is a really good place for the new discourse channel to or forum for things like that. Like we have one post at the moment which is like a showcase of something cool they did following actually Albert's tutorial from SBD, and they kind of built like a cool movie to show the orbits of the satellite. So I think we just need to promote that some more.
Yeah.
And then also just being back in the group of DIAS with students again, it's crazy. Like, we have to ask the Python channel and all the questions there. Like, we need to find a way of getting those students to ask the questions in the channel or to document the issues on the GitHub rather than just asking us and we're answering them. You know what I mean? Because we're missing then. Definitely learned so much about, flaws within the code base by listening to them. So it's promoting, to get involved with SunPy doesn't need to be contributing code, but just raising issues and asking questions and giving feedback.
I think it's really important to be a friendly face for students as well. So like, a lot of them were saying like, I'd love to like post something on the Riot, but I'd be petrified that it's a stupid question or something like that. So maybe you do little scientist or something. It's like, but I'm Sophia, I work on this, and so it gives a face to a random username. They're not so petrified to ask questions. But that's definitely a student problem, I think, with anything, not just something.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I still regularly find issues with SunPy every time we do any kind of teaching, and I'm like, how has nobody told us about this yet? I can't remember what it was for the SPD workshop, but I found something that had been hiding in the code base for years, and I was like, I cannot be the first person that this has tripped up. So yeah, I don't know how we go about doing it, but getting people to open issues is maybe our largest single challenge. I was just
about to say, it's like, I remember saying to something, oh, you should open an issue on that. And then the student was saying, well, what's an issue? Because they weren't aware of GitHub yet.
I think there's like a massive education gap between like graduate students from college who do physics or solar physics and like software. Like they don't necessarily know about GitHub. They don't necessarily know about issues or like, it's definitely an education sort of thing you probably address at like workshops. You'd be like, listen, if you find something wrong, can you please come talk to us?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a GitHub issue, right?
No.
We have many places you can
Yeah.
get in contact with. Any of them will suffice. It's not like we're getting bombarded on Twitter with these bug reports and not getting anything on GitHub, right? Nobody is just talking to us anywhere about them. So
I think it's less of like a gaps in technical understanding, though I think that's definitely true. I think it's more about like people don't feel like they own the software that they're using, right? Like, I mean, often the model is like you come in, your advisor hands you a piece of code, it's awful, you use that code, you struggle through it, and then you get a PhD, right? I think that's the sort of typical model. People aren't used to be able to saying like, this code like needs to be improved, or this code is great in this way, or I can like contribute back to this thing. Like, I don't think they're used to having like that concept of like ownership over the software you're using is like, I think people are not used to that idea. Like, I can be a part of the community that like develops this. It's still something that I think people are that's the missing piece.
Yeah,
At least
it's
that's
still a
from
new
my
idea,
experience.
isn't it?
I think more accurately, they don't own it until they've forked it. You know, like you give a piece of code, you sort of copy it onto your machine, you get it to do what you need to do for your research. That's your code, like the private copy that you have and not shared with anybody, but made better for exactly what you need it to do.
Yeah, and I think it's a culture thing in a group as well. So, you know, if someone was coming to work with me, I'd teach them about this sort of stuff straight away. But if they were working with someone who doesn't really do that, or you know, is working on their folder of code that they've been working on for 20 years, they're never really going to have that experience of it. So that's why I think we need to definitely try and make ourselves more friendly to students and get them to ask questions. But it's also those supervisors and those people who are writing the grant funding proposals to try and make it more understandable for them that this is a useful tool for their students and for their postdocs to work on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really tough though, because I mean, and in our group you've got me, Sophie, Laura, and we're always banging on about just ask a question, send it like continue all the time.
They're so probably so sick about it. That's why.
I don't think that there's been a single issue raised by anyone, and they definitely had problems. Like 100% have had problems with the code or found bugs. So it's really difficult to, I don't know, encourage it or make it happen.
No, yeah, this is a field-wide problem. I don't think we're going to solve it tomorrow, but it's good to think about it, and maybe we can learn from other fields who've done this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's some good examples of good practice out there that we can draw from, you know.
Yeah, and like this is the thing with discourse. I feel like it might be a little bit easier for people to ask a question, and then if they're like, "Oh, this is a bug," click this link and see if you can raise an issue, and like handhold people through that first step.
There's integrations between Discourse and GitHub as well to swap issues to like make a thread into an issue and stuff. So even if they don't end up opening the issue, one of us could like create a linked issue or something.
Yeah, sometimes you can have too many channels for people to ask questions. They're like, they see the Riot, they see Twitter, they see email lists, they see Discourse. Maybe it's just pick one, like it's the Discourse that Laura's suggesting, and really heavily promote that one. You know, so you get more people using that or something.
Yeah, I don't know whether we have I assume we don't have a different time to talk about this, but certainly my my thoughts are that the Discourse could, if it works for us in the way that we hope it will, replace the mailing lists eventually.
Yeah. We should really try to put in some time for that, because even just like our own understanding of it and
could
what
be a
we
good
kind of
hack day
want
thing.
Yeah.
So there's
trying to get some content up there. Sorry, David.
Unless Nabil's going to take an hour and a half. Are you going to take an hour and a half to talk about documentation?
No, probably not.
There's plenty of time today.
Okay.
So one thing I also wanted to add is I am reminded of an anecdote that I was told by someone who did support possibly for JWST, but for some sort of astronomical instrument, and they would basically refuse to answer questions privately on email and instead direct anyone to their equivalent of an issue tracker, because then all the help they gave was public and traceable, so anyone with the same problem could then see that. So I do wonder if actually having like helping people personally is maybe more approachable, but in the long term, detrimental because they don't learn how to report bugs efficiently. And that help is then only available to one person instead of anyone.
I was just going to bring that up too, because I think I know I've recently realized that I spend several days a week answering emails of people that have questions about SunPy. I'm sure like probably everyone else in this call often has had that experience too, because I think there's those of us that like people in the community or wherever we work, like they know because we talk about it all the time, probably that we work on SunPy and that we're invested and we want people to use it. And yeah, and I think that, but then that has a cost, right? I mean, just like you're saying, David, that like I think you both end up like repeating yourself a ton on all these individual little channels, mostly by email. And then it's not, that advice is not then available to anyone else. It's sort of siloed into this communication between you and this one other person.
Yeah, that's the perfect opportunity where you say to them in the email, oh, that's great, I'd love to help you. Let's take this over to Discourse and create a new, topic
and that's
for
the thing,
discussion. And then everyone will be able to see that.
100%, yeah.
And the other thing is that if we can get those conversations into the public domain, we can learn what's missing from our documentation by looking at them. If people keep answering those questions in places we can't see, we're never going to be able to fix the obvious holes in our documentation because we're never going to know what they are. Because I've had, I think, some comments maybe on the survey or in other places that I've had in other settings have like been critical of our documentation, but never specific. Like, it's just the documentation isn't good enough. I'm like, well, we try, so what would you like there to be in it? Yeah. So I mean you can always make the documentation better, but without having, I personally am at a loss on, like, other than just fixing bugs, because I'm sure there are functions that are missing proper doctrines or whatever, but like sort of on a structural level, I don't really know where to go with the documentation at the moment, personally.
And I think
I was just saying, this is like a discoverability issue, like where people aren't able to find what they need, or is it that we're lacking, content in certain areas? I mean, I realize now we're bleeding into this documentation discussion perhaps a bit, but
yeah, I was just gonna comment on that. Well, like what I was about to say was that exact thing, that like it's either the people like they want to Google their problem and find an answer, and then it's like a lack of knowledge of, say, students that don't understand how to read documentation. They just want an example to show them exactly what they want to do. So this goes back to maybe, I don't know.
And that's the other thing that I hope the Discourse will be able to do. Like, the showcase category in the Discourse could be an excellent source of things to move into examples. Like, oh, that's a really cool thing that you've just posted up there. Would you like to convert it into a Python script and maybe contribute it over here? Or one of us can do it if they really don't want to do that.
That's brilliant. I didn't even realize there's a showcase section. So I think it could be the perfect solution for the sort of thing I was thinking about, because like I don't want everything to be Twitter focused, I think, because not everyone's on social media. So if you had something like that on Discourse where you could share like snippets of different things that you can do with SunPy or things that people are working on, I think that'd be lovely.
What, and then link that in a tweet?
Yeah,
so like
exactly.
all your example tweets are just links to Discourse.
Totally.
Links to Discourse with a picture or a GIF.
Yeah, right. The GIF. It has to be GIF.
It has to be GIF.
Oh, I see.
So I mean, the Discourse stuff. Maybe this is a good time for me to give like an update on the Discourse stuff, and we can chat about that a little bit. Also, people have other things they want to talk about.
Before, yeah, I'm done. Work away.
Pass off those rails.
Well, I just wanted to quickly interrupt because obviously about the funding section before that. Obviously, I
do we want to move? Do we want to swap those around? Because I feel like we're closer to documentation now than we are anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously I put everyone down because I'm not aware of who deals with the finance for SunPy, and I'm not involved in the funding aspect of solar
that's
physics.
fine.
So we can move that later on.
How long have you? Well, I mean, okay. Shall we talk about discourse and then maybe move into documentation and then see where it goes? Yeah. Okay. I get. For those who haven't seen it, don't know, because we haven't done much advertising of the discourse yet. This is the Open Astronomy discourse. For those of you who don't know what discourse is, it's a piece of forum software. AstroPy have kindly paid the people who make discourse to host Open Astronomy's discourse for us. So we have a professionally hosted instance of discourse, which is set up and will be reliable. It's not running in a server in my basement. And there's still many decisions to take here about how we want to do this. So for the moment, the way that this is set up is we have high level showcase and ask questions categories where everybody from all the projects under Open Astronomy could ask their questions and then tag questions with respective things. So if you had a SunPy demo, you would post it in the showcase section and not in the SunPy one, which I appreciate is somewhat confusing. Laura and Nabil and I have been having some discussions about whether that's the best flow or whether there are other ways to do it. We're trying to simultaneously learn how discourse works, what the limitations are, and what's the best way to make it work for us. But if you should go to community.openastronomy.org and sign up for an account. If you have a good demo or a good question, you should post it, and we can always move posts around. Getting more content and more people on here to start off with is the best place to start. We can argue about categories more later. There is a way. Where did I do this? If you go into tags and find tags, I think you can set up notification on the tag somehow. Oh no, that's not the right thing. Anyway, I can't. I'm sure I did this once. Ah, there you go. You'll be automatically notified about all topics with this tag. So you can do that kind of stuff. I don't have a huge amount more to say, but if people want to try this out and give us and get involved with how best to lay out this stuff and what to do with it, then let us know. Because I've set it up and have run out of time to kind of take it through the actually getting people to use it stage, which is unfortunate. Thoughts, comments, questions, otherwise?
I think it looks really cool, and it'd be great to replace the mailing list with it.
First on the chopping block for the mailing list is definitely SunPy Dev. If we can replace SunPy Dev with the development category, so much the better. Because SunPy Dev is basically dead anyway. So.
I think this is great, Stuart. I think it's awesome and so much potential here. I think you're just going back to maybe this is a good time just to have a quick discussion about this. About, I would be worried if things went into showcase rather than into SunPy. Say a showcase about SunPy, people won't see it because if you're a SunPy user, you might not even really think you even use AstroPy, even though you do. And you click on the SunPy one, you don't see the cool stuff. And this is my fault. I moved that showcase to SunPy, the one that was posted there. and maybe it should go back to.
Can there be a SunPy showcase?
That's what I was trying to figure out, and it doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, you can do this, right, where you have tags you have things which are tagged as SunPy in Showcase.
Yeah, but say for someone that comes and they're kind of flicking through the SunPy discourse and they don't see, it's again just discoverability, and maybe when it grows this will make more sense. But at the moment, I just felt it was a bit lost in the Showcase thing.
You mentioned tags, so I don't know anything about discourse. So could you like have a post that's in SunPy, but then it also shows up in Showcase as well?
That would be great. So like, yeah, so it would be both. So the problem was that then when you clicked into SunPy, it wasn't there. But yeah, I don't know if this is the case. And can you do that?
I don't think so.
That'd be quite cool.
I
So it's
don't
like one or
think
the other.
so. I don't think so. I think posts have to have a category, and then they have to have one and only one category, and optionally a subcategory. So they have to have a top level category. They can have a subcategory, and then they can have any number of tags. I don't think you can make one post in more than one category or have things cross over like that.
Are we aware of a discourse developer we can harass?
I mean, their online stuff is very good. Their online help and stuff, so you could just search for it. I think it's really comes to a question. It comes down to like, I think the reason why I'm pro doing it Showcase and ask questions at the top level like this and not in SunPy is because I want this to be the open astronomy discourse that SunPy uses, and not the SunPy discourse.
Yeah, I think.
Because all of the idea of all of these projects, especially AstroPy and SunPy, is we all work so closely together that you very infrequently have a question which is just SunPy. And I think, but on the flip side, I get that is like.
See, I would push back on that in the sense that we understand that generally the question you ask might actually be AstroPy focused, but since you were playing on a solar physics context, even though it's just AstroPy coordinates, for example, you actually are technically doing SunPy.
It's like a solar specific question.
But like it can be a solar physics specific question, but it doesn't have to be in the SunPy category, right?
Yeah. But like in an ideal world, that would work, right? But I just feel like a user that would come onto this page won't understand that concept, or they might go into SunPy looking for an answer to the question that's actually in the ask questions. Or maybe this is just, again, we just need to make it clear when they come to this page about what they do. Or if you could have that cross-category thing, that would be fantastic. That it would show up in both. And even if it had the SunPy question was quite AstroPy focused, maybe you could tag AstroPy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think users will go, I'm using SunPy, and go into SunPy and want to post questions or showcases there.
Well, so what I have changed recently is I've allowed you to post in SunPy, but we could choose to just move the posts to the respective categories, certainly at the beginning when people don't like. At the moment, if you click on ask questions or showcase, there's nothing in there. So you're probably quite unlikely to post it.
I think also, like, if I'm looking down a showcase, I don't want a solar physics example to be in with all the other noise of astrophysics examples. Like, I think solar physics is a big enough subcategory.
I mean, I agree in concept, but it's not like any of our stuff is particularly high traffic.
Yet.
Exactly.
I feel like that is a premature optimization at the moment.
Yeah.
At the top when you click on SunPy, I'm just looking at it now. It's kind of like a description about talk about SunPy. Maybe you could like direct people to say, for example, to check out the showcase or something, and then depends if people even read the sentence at the top there.
I think if I delete this line break. There you go.
Aha, perfect. It's there already. I mean, it's better than nothing. I think you're right. I think people will just go into SunPy and look at it, but there does need to be a differentiation between the normal chit chatter and then these really nice examples that you want to highlight to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like so say if someone's looking for an answer to a question, like maybe it's already asked somewhere and they go to SunPy and don't see it because it's in the ask questions. It would just be great if you could if they could be linked to this, you know, so I don't know. I think it's awesome though. I think it's gonna be great.
Definitely better than a bunch of emails.
And the thing is, if you want it to be a bunch of emails, it can be a bunch of emails.
It's something for everyone here.
You can interact with each category, subcategory as its own mailing list, including creating posts by email. I don't know how to set the. This is the thing. I could click around the discourse settings for days.
And you can link it to GitHub as well, so that if a question comes in, you can like automatically kind of shift an entire conversation over to a GitHub issue.
Yeah, this does some stuff. I don't know what this does.
I'm just gonna say I'm uncomfortable automatically like shifting maybe in one direction. I've seen people I've seen people open issues on GitHub and then one person just replies, "This is not where you ask this question," just closes the issue and just links to the discourse. And I don't want to get into a point where we're like, oh, someone's actually asking a question, close. Like we get into that kind of pattern of behavior because I think that's incredibly unuseful.
Yeah, but it is. But I can appreciate why people end up there.
Yeah, no, I understand. No, I understand why,
yeah.
because they obviously want to produce, but I would solve their problem and then also say future questions should be on the discourse. I don't want to be like, oh,
yeah,
close the issue.
I don't
Go
think
ask.
that does that automatic link, the automatic conversions thing.
I just want to say Monica has been having some problems. I don't know if she wants to jump on. I don't know if.
Yeah, she was saying she couldn't speak during the last one. I don't know if she's got it working again. Is she on here?
Can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear you and see you.
Nice presentation, Sophie. I don't want to like distract from this discourse discussion. I wanted to say that was an awesome presentation, and I very much appreciate the recommendation to shift a bit towards showcasing examples of what you can do with SunPy in your research, as opposed to giving more of these talks of like, what is SunPy? What's a map? You know, that kind of thing. Because yeah, I agree that a lot of people are really interested and want to join the community, but one of the major setbacks is they don't get support from their supervisors. So if their supervisors can see what we're doing and how that enables the research, then I think that's probably the easiest way to sell it. So sorry for moving this conversation back into that direction.
Thanks, Monica. I really appreciate it. I think that's it, isn't it? It's trying to get into that mindset. That's the normal academic scientific mindset that people are used to, and working off that, but also kind of progressing how you want to showcase SunPy through that. It's a tough thing, but I think if we start with like cool showcase of people's work in something like this course, that's definitely a good stepping stone, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, you know, like a few people here are part of the like machine learning and heliophysics community, and like the machine learning talks are initially like, what is machine learning? This is an algorithm, this, you know, and now we're kind of beyond those talks, and people are like, this is what you can do. These are the research outputs. So I kind of see the same with SunPy. Like a lot of our talks were like, what is SunPy? Here's a map. Here's, you know, time series. And now we can just say like, okay, we assume that you've heard plenty of those talks, and here's a lightning round of examples of people using it in their research, even if it's like a minor example, and then putting that up on Twitter and blogs and stuff.
Yeah, and you can always have that basic stuff, but it's just a video or something from a previous thing, or or links to resources where you can read about it. So we're not saying you can't learn the basics,
right.
But it's just we're going to focus on this, and this is how you would find and read more about the basics.
Yeah. Just thinking about more ways to convince the supervisors, because I think we've already convinced, the students.
Yeah, totally.
This is almost the exact opposite of what you were saying, Sophie, about like the effort that it takes to write a blog post is like certainly high. But I wonder, and like I know, like doing sort of like more bite-sized examples is I wonder if doing something similar to like Monica and James Mason had done with their Helio ML book of like illustrating like with code, like how do you write a paper with SunPy and AstroPy and like the full like scientific Python stack, like showing people like end to end, like here's my manuscript, here's the stuff to do my analysis, here's the stuff to do my figures, like what does that actually look like? Because I mean, obviously we all have this code like knocking around in our computers somewhere. Like, could we come up with some way to like? I realize that's a ton of effort to create something like that, but I think like showing, like laying out an example of like how do you complete a whole project with like the essentially like Pi Astro stack, for lack of a better word, I guess. Like, I think that would be extremely valuable, but also again like very, very high effort as well.
Yeah, it would be, and this is why I would never suggest something like this, because I think you're all very busy people. But if it's you yourself suggesting it, go for it. But you need more than yourself and several volunteers who are enthusiastic enough to do it. I think that would be amazing to do something like that, but it would take a lot of time.
I think maybe just like, if we see a paper, if somebody comes forward and says we use SunPy, to just say like, what would you like to do? You could write a blog post, you could tweet about it, you could do your whole thing. It's kind of up to you, but we would really want to help you advertise your work.
I suppose it's been a bit proactive. If we see papers that are definitely written with SunPy, like should someone drop them an email or a tweet and say, listen, we'd love to advertise this. We have something that we could post from the SunPy Twitter discourse with, pick your favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever platform works best.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to drop in there and say for a number of years I was working on the Proba 2 mission as the instrument scientist person, and trying to get people to promote the mission was something that I had to do, and you really had to do a lot of the work for them, I'm afraid to say. And fine, in a paper they would maybe like drop in a reference in there, but sometimes I would even go as far as kind of taking their abstract and rewriting it a little bit, advertising how Proba 2 was used in that mission, send it back to them saying, are you happy for me to put this on our webpage? And then hopefully they would agree to that, and then you could release it as like a news article and tweet it and all the rest of it. And the second thing is trying to put something out extremely frequently was very important. So I don't know what you guys are doing with Twitter, for example, but you should be kind of aiming to put out a tweet every day, just something, even if it's just liking or resharing something. That can also kind of help in terms of promoting, and also even just like highlighting, as you were discussing before, where you can actually send comments and things like that. Sorry, my 2 pence worth.
Well, thanks. It's interesting to hear. I totally have come across the exact same thing of just like literally starting it for somebody. And even if you start it and they don't like it, then at least you've kind of kicked them into doing something about it. But it does take a bit of an effort to get it off the ground, I think, at the start.
Yeah, I guess this speaks to what Nabil was saying in the beginning, is that, this is our opportunity to kind of make a long-term plan for our communication strategy, as opposed to just haphazardly getting about it. And like Sophie, you've been doing like such a good job, but we will need someone else to do that. So we should talk about who those people could be or how much time they have or how to reach out.
Yeah. And I guess should it also be reaching out to, prospective instrument teams or people that are, you can see they're developing a package and be like, hey, do you want to come into our little ecosystem bubble? Or just, I don't know if that would fall under that role, or I guess just something to think about as well.
Sure.
So it seems like a juncture where I should say, if anybody is motivated by this who's on the call and fancies working on some of it, with Sophie stepping away, we do need somebody to lead this. So maybe think about that and reach out to me or someone else if you are interested in it.
And I'm definitely happy to help a little bit at the beginning.
I'm not saying that I can lead, but I'd be happy to participate for sure and lend whatever small expertise I have in this area.
Yeah, similarly, I can help out as well. So so some of the Twitter stuff and things like that, and the Discord stuff. I'm trying to help out a bit more now.
On a vaguely related note, just a tangent. How much of this is about something that struck me about Matt's comment about trying to do this every day? It seemed to me the point, or one of the points of that, is creating a sense of momentum. So and then referring back to one of the slides from Stuart's earlier talk, is saying we had 21 contributors and X number of pull requests from the core, and we've traditionally just focused on a core package. That makes sense. It's easy just to deal with one repo. But if we started trying to expand those statistics and saying, SunPy or the SunPy community or whatever is doing, this number of commits or this number of issues or whatever, to to affiliated packages, then I don't know if you start creating a more sense that SunPy's taking over. It's a bigger thing. You need to get in on this because it turns out that its reach is far wider. Because I think most people's understanding is influenced by SSW. So when people talk about SSW, they don't just think about the gen tree. And people aren't only going to use SunPy core. They're going to use increasingly, affiliated packages like AIAPy and so on. So I don't know if that's something we want to consider, is start redefining our SunPy activity as to include those, and we can maybe that helps with that sense of momentum or that sense of size.
I agree. I definitely think as we shift more into affiliated packages and stuff, that it's important to try and always include those when we're talking about SunPy with the capital letters in it as the project. There's a reason my statistics only included core, and that's because I didn't fancy arguing with GitHub's GraphQL API at 11 o'clock this morning when I realized I hadn't written any slides. So,
it certainly wasn't a criticism. And
no.
I get it.
I did think while I was doing it, this should be everything, and I was just I'm not doing that now.
So yeah, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, and it just seemed related in a parallel sense.
No, I think it's important.
Momentum that people want to dive in and get involved.
And also from the perspective of people asking, can I do X? If a whole bunch of X's people can do are only in affiliated packages and we're not putting that in front of their faces, then they're not going to see it and they're going to be like, oh, SunPy, don't do that. People have discoverability issues with the features that are in core, so I think we definitely need to work on the way we put things in front of people as we spread out. For the reasons we're spreading stuff out are solid and well reasoned from a maintaining perspective, but from a user's perspective, we're not exactly helping that issue. Matthew?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could make use of your example pages a little bit more with this respect, because the way I've kind of learned about SunPy hasn't been through any of the. I haven't had the I've been to one of your workshops, and that was it, a very long time ago. But beyond that, I haven't had the opportunity. And how I've learned about SunPy is just through examples. I would love to see more examples, but maybe you can also link some of your affiliated, ask people who are building the affiliated packages or sub packages or however they fit in, to put some examples on your example page.
Yeah, the thing is, we end up with more than one example page. There's already an example page on the go in like SunKit image, and there's an example page on the go in PyVista, and there's going to be an example page on the go in NDCube, and maybe we should think about not doing that.
And can you just, I'm not saying copy the content over, but at least have a link from somewhere which links to all of these example pages.
Yeah, because I think we looked at, could you search in the example search bar, and would it link to the other docs that are under SunPy.org? Is that something about? Or?
Yeah, we discovered this the other day. If you search in the SunPy documentation, it searches the other projects, but it doesn't do it in reverse, and it doesn't do it from the root SunPy.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think this is also a really good motivation to write examples that are not specific to any one package, which is what I'm trying to do with Solar Orbiter at the moment. So I put a link in the chat, but the idea is basically to say, well, from a mission perspective, what tasks do we need to do for Solar Orbiter? And then how can we glue together different packages to do that? Which I think helps in linking up the different affiliated packages and perhaps making the examples less granular and a little bit more motivated.
Yeah, and then we end up with yet another example gallery, which is all the examples you can do. Everything you want to do with Solar Orbiter is in its own example gallery, and this is a problem.
But maybe this goes back to the, like, I know we keep talking, and we don't need to copy everything aspirated, but like their learn.astrify.org, like, where they have long examples. Like one of them could be like, using Solar Orbiter data within the SunPy ecosystem. And then that's where that could live, where it kind of is a place to host longer, more fleshed out examples, where it's kind of from start getting the data the whole way down to having almost paper-worthy plots kind of idea. I know that that's a huge amount of work and effort, though, to do that. But
yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of what I was getting at before with my comment. It's more like things that show sort of more end-to-end like workflows, like that look like people's everyday workflows. I think that's been some of the criticism I've heard of our examples, and that, whether it's fair or unfair is a different question, but people, I think, see them as sort of toy examples, and they don't know necessarily how to pull that stuff out into their own workflows. And I think having those like the more, I guess, real world, like, this is a concrete problem I need to solve, and here's how to use all the individual parts is more useful. Where that fits in, I guess, with our existing kind of workflow is a harder question to answer.
Did you do that nice blog post? Oh, sorry, sure.
No, go on.
I was just going to comment on your really nice blog post, Will, from a few years ago now, I guess, that you map stuff onto field lines and estimated. Was it temperature and emission measure? I don't know. I can't remember what you did. Like, that was really cool, and that was like a full workflow.
Yeah, so maybe our blog posts. I mean, we can do like the notebook. Like, you can pull in a whole notebook and turn that into a blog post. I mean, maybe we should just aim to put some things there. I mean, and then it's enable someone to just pull down that code, and that's a space where we can bring in, a bunch of all the parts from our affiliated package ecosystem too.
But I feel like we're very rapidly getting to the point where between that effort, things like David's effort for instruments and many example galleries, we need a technical solution like learn.astrify.org, where there is go here, type something in search box, or see summary of examples. And I think, we're going to, the technical side of that is going to require significant work as well as the content side of it. And I don't know how we do that with the current resources we have available unless we can find some funding specifically for the education and documentation side.
Oh yeah, I mean certainly something like a learnsunpy.org would have. I don't see how that couldn't be just from a time perspective. You know, even if all the infrastructure was free, right? Like just from a time perspective, I feel like that has to be a funded effort almost.
I mean, I guess this goes all the way around to like what Sophie was saying in the beginning is like the awareness that no one really has time for this. So at least if you see something cool that someone has done, ask them to write a line for Twitter. And if they're willing to do more, that's great. But if not, at least it's up there. That does not require a huge technical overhaul, and it's something we can afford and will, I mean, as Sophie demonstrated, increase our engagement.
Yeah, something like Learn SunPy, you'd want the funded effort because you'd want to do it properly. You know, I think it's hard to do something like that on that big scale on a volunteer effort, and then you'll just regret starting it, you know, because it won't be perfect. But I don't know what kinds of funding is available for. It's very, very, very hard to find education funding for this sort of stuff. It's very much a lacking area.
Well, learnastropy.org was funded mostly by Space Telescope. And I think out of their JWST money or like community software dev attached to it, I think. Don't quote me on that. And the main website design was done by a GSOL student. And now there is somebody else working on it who's funded a different institution. So it wasn't like they magically found somebody who gave them money for it.
I do know a few examples of in science communication and science education. I have some colleagues who have PhD students who work on this kind of stuff. So they develop educational resources for a particular research project, and then they actually study the impact it has on their audience and do a lot of evaluation in science education. So, but that would be an academic sort of effort. You'd have to find someone who'd be interested in supervising a shoot for 4 years or whatever. But there are some weird ways of doing these sorts of things.
I just Jack opened a issue on the main repo entitled learn.sunpy.org ? The other day, and I just moved that to the SunPy project repo and added a few more details if anybody else has things that they think are worth noting down from this discussion. Please put it there. I will throw the link in the Matrix channel.
Yeah, I think we just need to keep our ear to the ground to funding opportunities that might be available.
Yeah, I think eyeing up a way of taking a bunch of Sphinx galleries together and indexing them in one place is going to be something that we need to think about. Because...
Or asking, read the docs.
Hey, as for the search thing, I'll message... open an issue and message on Lou about sometime. But that is not going to be. That's not necessarily enough for the examples. People are going to click on the main SunPy documentation example gallery, and they're not going to search for examples. Maybe we just need to say that there is only one example gallery and all of the examples live in core. But then you end up in a version pinning hell. Or maybe we move all the examples out into their own repo. One to think about. Do you want to talk documentation, Nabil, or do people have other things on along these lines?
So what I did want to say is that officially we end in 7 minutes. So if people are happy to carry on, maybe say another half hour after that.
No, we don't.
Don't we?
We end in an hour and 7 minutes.
Do we?
Those times are UTC.
Am I? Oh, of course they are. Whoops. Never mind. Time zones. How do they work? This is what I get for adding the times in UTC instead of GMT.
I would point out that I added the times in UTC. You did the least helpful thing and added them in PGT, which was useful only to Monica, I think.
Would have been useful to me. It will be useful to me soon.
We can but hope.
So, well, let me share my screen. Window. So, we bridged this. We came over this topic last time, and I think the notes were what's the? I am now confused. I have too many. Yeah, that's great. So we bridged this last time, and I'm going to discuss quickly what our current documentation looks like, what the feedback I've heard is, and some cases for how some of the most popular projects that I personally use day to day in my work look like, and whether or not we need to consider not necessarily. I've used the word overhaul here, but I think overhaul is probably a bit more dramatic than I intended it to sound. So I was going to show images, but then I realized I'm screen sharing. So here are the so here's the documentation instead. So this is the main SunPy documentation. This is the landing page, and I guess you could argue very straightforwardly that it looks kind of overbearing. You've got a little bit of preamble. You've then got the entire content just dumped right on the front page. And obviously that's kind of useful because, you know, you can find and search and you have access to the subcategories without necessarily having to click on the sidebar, which obviously would expand. You know, you click on the user guide, it obviously expands further down. And you get further breakdown per subcategory. Obviously we have the documentation has, I think, always been like this. I don't recall. It's before my time when the layout of the documentation. We have a user guide,
the table of contents in the index page. Yeah, I think so.
You've got the user guide that obviously takes someone new. I've actually never read it myself through the installation requirement. The installation part I have rewritten through installing SunPy, a quick tour of SunPy. Essentially, almost like I guess, you know, an AstroPy Learn in kind of probably not quite an AstroPy Learn, but basically walking through someone the core kind of overview feature, the core showcase features of each part of SunPy. Obviously, this is probably should be deleted. Walks you through, you know, how to use Fido. Lots of examples. Each part of Fido with HelioViewer database, map and time series, plotting, etc., etc., etc. And probably, should we really move that? Should that be in the user guide? And obviously, this cheat sheet that I'll come back to in future. Oh, I haven't updated this page. This page is very wrong. And obviously we have a code API that's auto-generated at build time, and probably the best part of, I guess I could say this without any controversy, the best part of the documentation is probably our example gallery, which has these very broad categories. And I'm going to bring up some comments that I've heard. Albert will, I think Albert might repeat them later, but I'll bring them up as well. Oh, we should rerun this. This is latest anyway. The showcases, I guess, how to do things in SunPy. A lot of the examples are deliberately short to run, and I guess that's what you want from an example is that it does one thing. And obviously, when we come to the concept of tutorials and like the workshop meetings, they are longer form pieces of code. Obviously, the example gallery, the developer guide, but that's just for us, and that's probably never going to need to be rewritten most of the time. So these are probably the most common, I would say. These are the things that I've personally heard and stored in my head. I haven't actually asked anyone. So if people have other things that they've heard about how bad our documentation is, I've heard people can't discover things. Sometimes I find that kind of weird because the search kind of works pretty well. But maybe that's just an issue with the way we've laid out our documentation, which is the second point. I have heard people say they don't really like the way we've separated the user guide from the API. Gallery.
On that point about separating it, we have had this discussion a few times, right? And AstroPy is a good example of how is of the other way, right? They don't separate the API from the guide. And I mean, I personally think that there are similar issues with the AstroPy documentation.
I'll bring it up while I'm.
So for instance, if you click on the coordinates link at the top there.
Coordinates? Why not?
Either way, that was.
I've actually not. That links to. Sorry, I'm now just being curious. Lovely.
So this is like a single RST file that has all of this narrative text, and then if you scroll down to the end where you get to reference/API,
which want to show
that reference/API at the bottom is an automod API call.
So this is the equivalent of our code ref section in our documentation, which is
yeah. So
just
it's combining the two things together, and I think. I don't know. I mean, it's.
Oh wow!
I don't think our user guide is great, but I definitely think it performs if there's a section where we want to say download a thing and then map the thing, that's working well, and then having it laid out all in one go like that is not necessarily great. Good times.
And this is AstroPy's. I guess AstroPy don't really have a gallery because they have the learn. Yeah, so I'm going to say, obviously, I've heard that documentation put up, and obviously, we have had Google GSOC students who have said that they've actually preferred AstroPy's layout of the combined narrative and API. Is that they see the example how to use it, and then at the bottom is the API itself. Obviously, our gallery organization, a gallery is split into broad categories, but the problem is that some of them obviously overlap categories because, for example, acquiring data, but there are maps here. So, is it really a map example, a data example? We've had to create categories ad hocly as required to try and split off, the aim of that example. And there's no way to filter this. There's no way really to search it. There's no metadata to, slim down to find an example that you require. Obviously, that's partly the issue that Student Gallery I don't think has that inbuilt, and that would require an upstream. That would definitely require an upstream change in the gallery, which someone will have to check if they want, implement it, and that's probably not a trivial thing to be doing. And so I guess my last general point was, as we've already touched, is that obviously getting feedback on documentation is difficult. You know, you get the general just, oh, they didn't like it for this or that, but then, you know, is that enough really to be sitting down? Okay, we should be burning down the documentation, starting again. Is it not necessary? Just we don't know what necessarily we need to tweak. And I guess something to think about in future is how do we get feedback on our documentation and our example gallery in a way that allows us to iterate into a better version of them.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is we could spend months rebuilding our documentation layout and it be worse and never know. I mean,
like, we almost shouldn't be making the decision. I mean, because we're totally biased in everything that's already available in SunPy. So there's going to be huge things that we think are clear which aren't.
And also when, I guess, users aren't experts in how to structure documentation. So I think actually it's kind of to be like, a user can identify when it's hard to find something, but won't necessarily know how to restructure it. So like you wouldn't expect undergraduate students to be telling universities what teaching mechanisms are good, for example. So I think it is often actually quite challenging because none of us are experts in how to structure documentation.
But we aren't even collecting that feedback on what's difficult or what's easy.
Yeah, true.
So like we can't even like random walk our way to better documentation because we have no input.
Two things that come to my mind. You could add a little like request button that links to maybe a post on Discourse where people could like post suggestions of, I'd like to see this example. So that could be a way long term to try and get people to make suggestions. Of course, you'd have to encourage people to do that. But one thing that I found really useful in the past, and something we did last week, which is why it's in my mind, is just a user group. If you want some like first feedback of how people have found it, you could get a group of, just some postgrads from your own research groups or postdocs, or, just a variety of different people who'd be willing to just chat for an hour on a Zoom meeting or a Jitsi or whatever, and get them to have a look at it beforehand and give you some direct like discussion feedback on it. But it requires time and effort to do, of course, as everything. But user groups are very handy for that sort of thing. It might just give you a general direction of where to go next.
You might just have to be a little bit careful with some students who might be too timid to actually speak up and
definitely,
make constructive criticisms.
So when I think about what we should do to documentation, I guess in my mind, after my postdoc didn't pan out the way I wanted it, I became a Python developer, a Python web developer, and I got intimate with Django, Xarray, FastAPI, and I'm going to basically go through the API documentation on a surface level about how they structure it and how they present their information as necessarily as a way to demonstrate what we could potentially do. So when I say an overhaul here, I'm talking about the opening pages, the first welcoming pages of a documentation.
Yeah, I mean, comparing that to our opening page is pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's what I'll be comparing. I'm not necessarily talking about the structure because for the most part, the structure is the same. They have examples, they have tutorials, they have the code API, obviously, because you need that code somewhere. And so I'm not going to talk about AstroPy's documentation because I don't really use it a lot. So I'm going to start with Django's first. So this is the landing page for Django's documentation. And it's obviously a very different style completely to how our website even looks like. But you can see the landing page is first steps, and it links to overview, a tutorial, advanced tutorials, getting help. It then even explains like how the documentation is itself laid out, and then goes into Django itself, the model layers, the viewer layers, the templates, the forms, and then etc. etc. And this is a very long page because there's a lot of Django. And at the bottom, it talks about the project itself and the community. And this is something that we talked about last time in the last year in the meeting, but we haven't really kind of, I guess, thought about since, is that a lot of design choices that we make in SunPy or have made necessarily maybe without any thought, Django try to write them down, in a way that new people can come and go, okay, why was this done like this? And there is at least some text. You may not agree with the text. You may think that, okay, they're being, I wouldn't necessarily agree with their logic, but they have on some level written down their logic.
Mm-hmm.
This is how Django operates. I mean, the other issue is that if you're uncareful, you get the contents page, and that's just all of this garbage, and so you have to be careful.
I think one of the key sections from that first page, though, is that one, how the documentation is organized.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't even tell people where they should go to look for certain things, which I think is one of the biggest hurdles, is that like you have to tell people where they should be looking, because they can't know a priori where things are.
Also, the fact that they have like getting help so far up that as well, which isn't actually a link to most of the stuff in the documentation.
Yeah, so I think you can look at this and go, okay, you compare it to what we have, and like this, we can definitely like steal this structure and just slam it right there in the documentation. And maybe
I was just going to say, I have a feed. What's on their FAQ page out of interest?
Why does this project exist?
Yeah, it's right at the beginning. Yeah.
Is it stable? Does it scale? Who's behind it? How is it licensed? How do you cite? Obviously, we have a separate. We have.
Yeah. So like. Yeah, that would be good too.
So we have like a very different landing page, and obviously the rest of
yeah, there's a guide.
The rest of it is
there's
like
API
like the user guide, right? It's like our user guide. Oh, how do you like Django glance? How do you install it? There's links to other pages. How do you verify it? And then obviously
even renaming the user guide to getting started in our documentation would probably be a beneficial change, because that kind of also that separates for instance, in the code reference part of our documentation under coordinates, there's a lot more information than there is in many other places. And maybe making the user guide more a getting started page versus a reference, and then having what is under code reference have more information, kind of a bit more AstroPy style.
Because there are parts of the user guide that I think aren't necessarily useful within the user guide. But yeah, obviously you have to remember that I'm going to show Django's documentation and I'm going to show Fast API's documentation, that they are obviously a library. It's a project that you import and you create a very specific kind of program with it. You're not, unlike say Pandas or Xarray, you aren't creating a website. You're not creating a service that other people can use. So obviously that documentation is laid out in a way that, okay, this is how you write a Django app. You're not going to, we're not going to be writing an example like how do you, write a SunPy app, because that's not how, people would use SunPy. So obviously you have to keep that in mind when you look at how they've structured it. But I think the landing page for the documentation is exactly something that we need to look at and probably steal, if I'm honest. The other thing I was going to talk about is X-Array. So I'm going to talk about this in a second. Is that so? Our SunPy theme came about through a GSOC project. Is it 3 years ago now? Was that project 2016? Was it? Oh, do you remember, Stuart?
I don't know, but the wiki I'll remember.
So before our documentation did look like this before, and we sat down with a GSOC student and came up with a a theme, a layout, how we should do everything. And one of the issues is that the underlying theme is now quite old. It's a Sphinx Bootstrap stream. There's Bootstrap 3. It hasn't seen an update since 2019. And so I'm currently in the process of working on replacing that with the PyData theme underneath, which is what X-Array looks like and Pandas as well. So our theme's going to look more like this, at least in the sidebars.
It was 2017, so it's 4 years ago.
So this will change in some form in future. But obviously X-Array have a slightly different landing page, as you can see from here. Though I wonder if I should look at the latest. I should probably look at the latest just in case. And it's obviously just getting a touch, the focus and the history, and then you get right stuck into their, okay, that's a very short get started guide. It's not. So, but obviously from the sidebar, you can see the layout here. So obviously a clear delineation between developers and contributors, the community, like links to like a Stack Overflow, GitHub. But one of the things I wanted to point out was they actually directly link to tutorials and videos that we have on our project page, which is separate from documentation, but you can obviously get to it. We have presentations and posters on the org website, but they aren't linked to on the project, on the actual documentation website, and whether or not we want to control that. Maybe we want to merge the two. But they have a very similar to us. They have a Get Started, which I basically just talked about installing, and then the user guide, which I think has a nice terminology page, and then breaks it down the same way that our user guide works. They have a gallery. I think and then again they have the API reference that we do, and then
the how do I is very nice.
Yeah, so I think this is the part I wanted to focus on for X-Array itself, was that they have a how do I page. And obviously, like, okay, you want to add a coordinate value, you want to change the order, you want to stack them, you want to remove this, you want to, shrink down, and they have an action and the functions that you would probably tweak, the functions you would call, methods you would call, whatever you would want, and some of them aren't. And obviously, we have something like this, but for basically translating from IDL to Python. And this is probably what I would say that we need to steal from X-Array's documentation, is a how do I page that goes, okay, what are the most common features, and we just like put the string. So if someone were to search differential rotation, they might actually be the first step might actually be to how do I page that literally then has like a link to an example here or some other part of the documentation.
I wonder if we could combine this. We could stick a text box or something at the bottom of this, which was just like not on the list, type it in here. And we could collect those somewhere.
I think this goes really well with what Sophie was saying about having more smaller size, smaller kind of bite-sized pieces of information. And I think obviously doing something like this is creating one of these is much easier than say having a whole gallery example for. I think one recent example I think Laura brought up a while ago is that people weren't aware of how to save something to a FITS file, right? Or dumping a map to a FITS file. because of how our documentation is structured, that wasn't necessarily obvious. And obviously that's just one call, a map.save call. That's not necessarily worthy of a whole example gallery entry, but it's perfect for something like this, where it's like, how do I save, a map back to its FITS file? Well, then, map.save name of my file, right? I mean, it's perfect for stuff like that.
Yeah, I think what's particularly interesting about this is how little information there is in the second column here. It expects you to click the link and work it out. It isn't. It's easy to scan because it's so short on the right-hand side.
I think it immediately tells people like what is possible in like the shortest bit of text, right? Yeah.
And it'd be easy to add new ones continuously, if someone raises an issue, we could use the add. I think that's great. It's awesome.
One thing though is that for Xarray, because it's a very focused package on doing things with n-dimensional arrays, it'll be a little bit harder for SunPy because it covers a much broader range of things. Not impossible, it's more difficult to be as concise with the questions. Like,
yeah, I totally agree. I can see the criticism that it's not well organized.
Yeah, I mean, you can't please everyone all the time. I mean, I think it is great, but I think you would need some sort of filtering or tags or something that you could say, because it could be a very long list for somebody.
I think it's also probably worth keeping this how do I page tightly scoped to things that are actually in the core package as well. As far as docs.sunpy.org goes, right? And then maybe having similar ones in other places.
Yeah, so I think this would have to be tailored per package.
And the other thing that would be like, that's actually all of those things on that list are great search terms.
Yeah, so I bet
if you search the Xarray documentation, you will so frequently get one of those crop up at the top than anything else. Like, although not apparently. How do I? Yeah, is there? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that would be the goal of this page. Would be short and concise to phrases that would allow this page to be hit either first or second by a search. And so, obviously, I want to say that I think another thing about Xarray docs is they have Xarray related projects on there. So I think one of the issues, I guess, when I look at the main website is that we have obviously a strict separation between the project and our documentation. Where obviously Xarray are like, well, okay, if you want to find a list of affiliate packages, you have to go to the project's website to find them. But obviously Xarray is like, okay, it's just right here.
Well, I mean, the original objective of the theme we built and having that cohesive navbar at the top was to blur the line between our documentation and the rest of our website. Like, our documentation and rootsunpy.org are supposed to be considered a single site.
And obviously, they have the videos where we could potentially also link them. I did want to bring up that what I do want to avoid is having roadmaps on our documentation, because as you can see, this hasn't been updated for 3 years and is essentially kind of.
We just there's a link to us.
Is there?
Xarray is also used more broad. Go back.
I don't know what page.
No, there. Up. No. There's SunPy is mentioned on that page. Search for it.
Not
that page. One of the pages you just had up. Development roadmap. There we go.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, there we are. Links to NDCube. So I don't. Yeah, that's a win for Danny, I think.
Oh well, it's not just me, Stu. Several people have been very involved in that.
There is some discussions about adding WCS support to Xarray at the moment, which would be interesting.
Yes, it sure would be.
Oh, well, of course. I was like, who would have opened this issue?
Who would have done that? Yeah.
No, I need to. Yeah, I'm not going to get involved in that. Yeah, so obviously once we rebase the theme, we're going to have kind of dual sidebars that will look like this in some form.
That makes it so much better having the contents page on the right because it keeps the left-hand bar so much cleaner.
Yeah, so we're going to still have a top bar, and we're going to probably override. Okay, this is the wrong page to scroll down on, but yeah, I'm not going to talk through the theme because I'm going to do that. And so my last example is pandas. And pandas takes a completely different route to all the two we've seen so far, though more in line to Django. But as you see from their landing page, they have 4 big buttons, 4 big cards with buttons underneath them. You either get started, you get the user guide, your API reference, the API reference, or the developer guide.
Scikit image is quite similar to this as well. Just while we're discussing other things.
Obviously, the installation, has a lot of. I don't know if this. I assume this is not on Reader Docs. Pandas. I've actually checked how. It's a lot of HTML. So I wonder if this is because these look like actual HTML cards.
It must be Sphinx, right?
So obviously, Pandas takes a different layout and a lot of like collapsible HTML elements. That's like, okay, how do you install it? This saves not content, this saves not in Pandas. Obviously with in-depth, and then an intro with links to tutorials, and then if you're coming from any of these, this is how you might, compare with R, for example, and much like our IDL page, which maybe could do with updating, if I'm honest. Maybe there's
it probably needs updating or removing, to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't think it's been edited in almost the lifetime of the project.
I do wonder if we need like AI prep under SSW and then a link to AIPy, that kind of thing.
Feels like a better place for how do I, to be honest. How do I prep my AA data?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, maybe that is.
But there again,
maybe setting it up as a how do I versus as opposed to a IDL to Python translation. I think the how do I serves sort of the same purpose, except lifts it up like one level higher. So how do I do this task in Python rather than how do I and I think it's sort of the same question, but maybe phrased a bit more helpfully.
Yeah, so once you get past the opening part of Pandas docs, it then turns into, for example, our user guide is like their example. 10 minutes to Pandas, intro to basically most of their structures, etc., etc. And their API documentation is just their API documentation. There's no narrative docs with it. So in terms of like the overall structure, we follow how other projects do it. And I don't think there's necessarily a change to. We don't necessarily I don't think we necessarily need to merge our API documentation with a user guide or parts of the user guide. We just need to look out, I think, primarily on a layout and presenting on the first instance. Basically, our index pages need to be tidied up to be useful. I was going to show Xarray's docs, but Xarray, because it's you're constructing an application, so it's very laid out. Okay, here's why you should do, here's why you should use Fast API, and here's the tutorial on how you write.
You should use Fast API because it's feckin' awesome. That's why you should use Fast API. But
obviously their tutorial user guide, is walking you through how to construct, a Fast API application, which obviously isn't what you do for SunPy. You're not making an application at the end of the day. You are hopefully doing, solar physics in some form.
It's interesting they've got the two sidebar.
Yeah, and this is all in this is all Markdown. This uses MK Docs, if I recall.
I think, did Matt just want to get in there?
Hi, yeah. Just one quick question. Where do you guys actually stand on having examples within the code? Because when we've been working on Transform, we've had a couple of small examples actually within the code itself. How do you feel about that? Because it means you always have an example transported.
Sorry, can I just...
Yes. Okay.
When you say inside the code, you mean the documentation string?
Yeah, in a doc string. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so we we don't enforce it, but we do have that in our... trying to think of one that actually has a useful...
So I think lots of the coordinate stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But before I asked the question, I kind of just grabbed a random piece of code and I just to see what you had in there, and that particular example didn't have an example.
Rotated sunshine.
Yeah, so I've just opened Transform with Sunsender, which has an example.
And because those are code snippets, there is tooling that executes those tests and executes them as tests and compares the output. So those examples in the docstring also form part of our test suite.
Okay, and I've been a bit lazy. I haven't actually looked through in terms of your kind of your test suite itself. How many kind of like tests do you normally kind of implement for each piece of code?
I think that varies wildly.
Okay. you don't have like a standard that has to be followed there.
Well, we try and make sure that at the very least, all of the code is executed by our test suite.
Okay. You aim to like
tooling that does that.
Not decrease your code coverage is usually the kind of baseline objective when adding some new feature.
That is not necessarily a good indication of how well tested that piece of code is, but it is at least a bar to cover.
For sure, yeah.
I think it's the bare. That's the bare minimum that we usually aim for.
It somewhat depends on how enthusiastic the developer is for testing, or either that or how willing they are to be browbeaten by everyone else's comments on their PRs to add more and more tests.
It also kind of depends on what the code is, right? Some code is way easier to write unit tests for than others.
Sure.
But regarding the doc strings, I think it's fair to say that we don't require them. We highly encourage them, but the lack of requirement means I think there are definitely gaps in, lots of cases where there are not examples in doc strings.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
We're up to 2,300 unit tests collected by PyTest when you run it now, so it's a decent number.
That's good to hear.
Does that collect the doc test as well? It does run them. Yeah,
yes, I think it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it runs them, so it must collect them.
I think each individual RST page is counted as one.
Yeah, the RST pages are one, but I think I'm trying to find an example. Hang on. Package JSOC. Each doc test item is collected as a separate item. So at the very least, each method's doc string is collected as its own thing. I'm trying to find an example where we've got more than one separate code block in a doc string.
If you check diffrop, that has 2 blocks of examples.
Where's diffrop live?
Yeah, it's nice to have them in doctrines, but I think we want to.
Looks like it collects it as one.
We want to avoid them in net where possible. Probably is what I would say.
Well, at the least, we've opened a couple of issues for improving the SunPy documentation in the last half an hour. Anybody have got any other questions or thoughts?
But maybe one thing I think we talked about this last time as well is that while all of the content that is there is actually pretty good, there is some stuff that's kind of missing, and that's like the the thing that Nabil showed, like the philosophy, like, so like what is a map and what it's supposed to do, but not in terms of like the API, but in terms of like what was it intended to do in the first place, or like
why
what are coordinates and what are they supposed to do? But again, like not necessarily, code, but just like kind of a high level thing. This is what it's supposed to do. This is what it's not supposed to do. Because a lot of times people, they, as we found, misinterpret what map does and doesn't do, and don't know exactly what coordinates do and don't do. And some of that's outside the scope of SunPy. It's go and read the papers and stuff like that. But some of it, I think, could be handled by like more in-depth articles about a piece of
I mean, I think our documentation is almost completely devoid of asking the question why at any point.
And obviously, a lot of other, I think it's only Django I've ever seen the why. Xarray doesn't have really. I mean, it has Y Xarray, but that's just like, you should just use Xarray because it's n-dimensional. That's essentially what this page is. This is what basically, if you summarize this page, it's n-dimensional, and you can't do. You can do it in pandas, but it's a pain in the ass. Essentially, is what this page is.
Yes, use Xarray. It's less annoying than Panda.
Well, obviously, Django tries to go beyond. Oh, it's just easier.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if it's philosophy. It's just like longer articles or longer bits of information that don't belong in the code reference because it's not code. They don't belong in the getting started because it's not getting started. It's kind of like a separate. I think in one of the docs things that we linked to before, there was like 4 sections. There's like getting started, how-tos, and then like articles or discussions, and then like code ref was like the other section.
Yeah. So it's talking about, it references like topic guides. Django has like tutorials, topic guides, reference guides, and then how-to guides, and they're very, it describes how it works and how it's.
I suppose my question is, if someone asks you what is a map, where would you point them, or would you just tell them?
I guess the string to would just link them to the map.
Yeah.
I don't know what actually.
Well, we have in the user guide, we have the data type. We have a whole data type section, and we have a map and a time series section. And I mean, it does sort of go through what a map is, what are the different parts, what's the point. I mean, it could probably use a bit more, but yeah. So this is the tour, and then if you go to the data types down here, and then maps. I mean, that's probably comes the closest, but it could probably use, even more, maybe. Bit more.
Even like the WCS stuff. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say that the issue with this data type section is that it's talking about creating custom maps, and that probably shouldn't be.
Why is that in the user guide?
So I think that's the point. This probably belongs on the API part or somewhere else.
It belongs in the dev guide. Wait, is that subclassing or is it just I have weird data?
I think that's saying I have weird data.
Okay. That probably belongs in code reference. Code reference should probably just be reference, and user guide should probably be getting started.
It's called custom maps, but it's actually just saying you want to construct a new header for your data that map doesn't recognize. And then you pass it in as data header pair. And then you plot it.
So what you're telling me is that it's really documentation from MakeFits WCS. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that is. Sorry, Laura.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, building on what Shane was saying, it's almost like you need specific documentation for the solar community that aren't aware that a map has all this. You almost take an introduction to WCS, and this kind of lies there's really nice documentation at the moment that Danny wrote for NDCube. And maybe it just needs to be a section of and more of an introduction to why you have to really care about the WCS or the meta information within your map data. I don't know. People just think it's an array and then you just change your axes around it rather than having to think about what your observer is doing, or, even the fact that people are like, why am I getting a bug when I'm trying to convert this coordinate into something else because you need an observer, and I don't know.
I think this potentially speaks to, the weakness of modularization. Although, we've pitched its many advantages, we're trying to explain, I think sort of people, like, to go back to something we said earlier, it's like, I want a workflow example. Like, these are all like baby examples, and like, how do I actually do my work? And people, like, they don't care that it's SunPy or NDCube or AstroPy. There's like, I have AIA data, or I have whatever it is data. I want to do this, and then that goes to what Laura was just saying. I don't have a solution here. I'm just moaning. But yeah, it so quickly encourages the scope creep of your docs, and that way madness lies for maintainers, of course. But that's what people probably need.
Well, I think this brings up the kind of the concept of what is an example. And to me, an example should be a small, when someone says, I want a workflow example, I want to work through, a workflow example, like, at the moment, that's a tutorial. Like, that is like a longer form piece. Like, obviously not necessarily, we shouldn't put them in our documentation, but I feel like that's a separation that seems slightly arbitrary to example gallery, but I feel like an example gallery should do like one thing. And there's like a kind of plot.
Sure, but thinking bigger, like, if why, like, sort of the how-tos, people will,
No, I think we should add that. I don't know.
But it was said earlier, for good technical reasons, that, this should be restricted to core. I think the majority of users don't care that it's in core or not in core. They say, SunPy, it doesn't have good enough documentation because it doesn't tell me how to, prep AIA because that's now an AIA Pi, or it doesn't tell me how to get the ghost temperature because that's now in SunKit instruments. Like I said, I don't have a solution, and I recognize the very sensible reasons why it has been so modularized. I'm just complaining.
Yeah, but just because the code is doesn't mean our documentation has to be necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry, there's like just the coordinate stuff. Like, the coordinates documentation is really clear when you understand the coordinates framework, right? But there's like a missing bridge between it. It needs like an introductory page to, how does the coordinate stack work within SunPy? And how does the AstroPy stuff work with like solar frames? And just an introduction, so then people appreciate it and then can use it, rather than being like, this is really complicated. But it's once you kind of understand the kind of philosophy of Shane was saying behind it, it becomes a lot more clear. But again, where does that lie is the question. But I think there's a kind of scope, I think, where there's a place for that to go somewhere.
So basically, like you said, Laura, NDCube has like a whole sort of section.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with NDCube. It's talking about AstroPy WCS, or just WCS like in general. But just like something somebody said about X-ray, is that NDCube is fairly like directed. Like SunPy is a lot more sprawling, so there are much greater consequences for taking that same idea and putting it everywhere in SunPy. But I'd say that's what users. That might be why some of the complaints are the way they are, is that people want to go to tell me how to do this one thing. If it sprawls everywhere, they're not going to look everywhere.
Right.
Like,
I'm sorry.
maybe
I'm
that's just
jumping in because I wanted
SunPy.
to build on what. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No.
I want to build on Laura's perspective here. That right. I mean, I'm coming in. I haven't done any SunPy development. I'm moving from PDL into the Python arena. And the biggest problem I've had as a noob user is the plethora of modules that are all sort of interrelated, have overlapping functionality. It has not been clear at all when I want to reach for an AstroPy object or a SunPy object. And so having these larger blocks of documentation that tie in, why bother with a map as opposed to, an AstroPy fits object? That will really help speed adoption rates and lower the entry barriers. I'm done.
Absolutely.
I was going to quickly suggest, if there is someone else interested, I'd be keen to try and do this on the hack day on Friday.
Yeah,
that'd be great. First pass at doing more explainy documentation.
Right, SunPy the novel.
Yeah, or SunPy.map.generic map, the user guide.
Yeah. I mean, even we could do over the week, ask some students or ask Craig if you've any input or anybody else to be like, what's not clear, what would you like to see? We have some students at Dias we can definitely ask about this to get some perspective.
Yeah, I definitely think it'd be good to ask people. I think it's also good to decide where it goes, because I don't think it really belongs in code reference, because it's not really that. So yeah, you might want to have a separate place. But I guess if you have content, you can just move it around afterwards.
I've got a question. Who writes the examples? That's one thing, and I'm going somewhere with this.
It's largely the developers who write the examples,
and
we do occasionally get drive-by example contributions, but
okay. And is there scope for people who are using the code to submit their examples somewhere?
I mean, we would love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And something else. One thing I was going to say, as I'm kind of learning as I'm going with SunPy. Feel free to use me as a sounding board if you've got a new example you want somebody who has got nothing to do with it to look at and just see if it makes sense. Feel free to shoot me a message, and I'll happily see if I can follow it.
That's great. Yeah, spread the word if you know of anybody. If you did, even like if anybody's done a cool thing with SunPy or a cool piece of code you feel like would be useful to someone else.
Because like when it comes to these example pages, I'm not sure whether you're never sure when someone's developing these pages whether they are very specifically chosen, or because you could imagine a scenario where you can get thousands and then suddenly the page is not useful anymore because there's too many examples.
We're rapidly walking up to that line, but that is a problem that I would love to have. So throw them in there. We'll deal with it later.
Fair enough.
How much kicking and screaming resistance would there be in trying to come up with something that Craig suggested there? Like something maybe along the lines of like, what are the main things that SunPy is actually built on? And I know that's not our package and we don't maintain it and we don't do it, but we're going to write like, an article on it to, so when people land in SunPy within a click or two, they can sort of get readings like, oh, okay, so this is just one cog. This is an entry point into like, I'm not doing my analysis in SunPy. I'm doing it in the wider Python ecosystem because that's still a misconception.
Do
you run the risk of running into like deprecation issues after?
I mean, we don't need to.
Why we haven't done it.
We don't need to like describe how to use AstroPy WCS, but we just need to tell people that it's there and point them at it, right?
But also, it might be helpful to say what it is, because again, as Laura mentioned before, it's like why don't I just like switch my axes around and it just works? Like
I feel like that's kind of like a why. I always feel like that kind of goes into the why bit of the documentation, right? On a second level, there's like why is map a thing, and then a bit underneath is why is map built on this, right? Or
yeah, but expanding on like and taking the risk, and it does have overhead. Like as time goes on, I realize that, but to not be afraid to like explain in a bit of detail, in this particular example, like what WCS is and how like the AstroPy WCS package then like implements the concept of WCS so that people are just like they see how the pieces fit together. I don't want to have to like maintain it, but I also appreciate that what Craig
I don't want to have to write it.
Well, I don't want to
because let's face it.
Yeah, we've done this before a few times for different things, but I think unfortunately Craig's point is a really good one.
Yeah, it is, and I often find I answer questions along the lines of, "Oh, what should I use for this thing?" And I don't know. It feels like I have half of the PyPI index in my brain sometimes, and I'm like, "Oh, well, there's this package over here," and I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a good way of how to document that to people in a way that is actually accessible and
even if there were a catalog somewhere of these are the packages we know about and these are the roles they might fulfill, this is why we like this one and not that one, and that would go a long way toward getting noobs sort of ramped up. If you think about like SolarSoft, you get a package deal, right? Everything is within IDL and it's all sort of allegedly mutually compatible. And somebody coming into the Python community, right, is faced with this wild jungle of things that work together, and they're sort of there are clusters of packages that work well together, but it's not all guaranteed to integrate. And literally just having a directory of these are the things that Stuart likes is a big step in the right direction.
Sorry, go ahead, Stuart.
The Solus focus stuff, the kind of the idea is the affiliated package list is that, but obviously
it's not
really a wider problem, right? It is in terms of here is a bunch of packages that we know work well with SunPy. If you're using SunPy and you want to do solar image manipulation, here is SunGit image, right? But that's still very narrow in focus in comparison to the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped down your throat. Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said.
Maybe that's like something we could put on the end of the affiliated package webpage. It's like we could have a list of packages that we use or work with, like, AstroPy, AstroQuery,
Matplotlib. Maybe like again focus it towards users, not so much like we have to document what like we use, but like if you're going to be doing solar analysis in Python, these are probably going to be useful to you. In which case,
would it be worthwhile making like a really small PyPy package that just installs a whole bunch of versions of our affiliated packages and stuff that we know work together in a nice way, so that they could install, I don't know what you'd call it, but yeah, it just basically installs SunPy, NDQ, Matplotlib, SciPy, all those sort of good things.
Yeah, but then you still have a discoverability problem, right?
They won't know where it comes from,
or that they've even got it installed.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say that if you install SunPy all, you essentially install all of that already, except NDQ, but that will change in future.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, so I put a bullet point of things that I thought, based off review, that we could. This is when I was writing the thing, better landing page. We obviously have some like get help text on our website that isn't in our documentation that maybe should be. I think maybe advertising our workshop material somewhere in the documentation.
The problem with the workshop material is that it's never updated.
The last one. We just always keep the last one.
What is the last one?
Right, just the last. We don't obviously advertise the 2015 one because that's definitely not going to work. But
maybe that's not a bad idea in the workshops repo. We should just have a directory which is symlinked to the latest workshop.
Yeah,
and then we could link to that directory.
I think to my mind, the most important one that I'm not sure how we would review this, but I think people need to it would be nice to sit down and go through the user guide and like work out what should be here, what should be moved.
You could reframe that into make the user guide getting started and move everything that isn't getting started out somewhere else.
And then obviously you have to decide what that something else looks like.
But yes.
So that's what I came to, like looking at everything else. But obviously, people have other ideas, and that's the end of my talk. That's it. Other than we're going to fix the thing eventually.
Okay, we're down to our last 8 minutes or something. So, does people have other things they want to talk about, specific to what we've chatted about already, or?
Probably should have put the break further down. It's a bit weird to break it into 1 hour and then 2.5 hours. Oh.
In some ways, it was I feel like that section has flowed pretty smoothly, although we have completely skipped over the funding thing.
I guess we could talk about that if people don't want to talk about documentation. So, I guess my point is that I've been out of. I've never had.
I don't.
Do people have any?
I don't know what we're going to talk about in this section, right? And I don't. I'm not convinced it's worth starting. Actually, with 7 minutes left to go, I think we should bump it.
What I would suggest is that I guess we're talking about fixing documentation. Is that with a non-focused small grant, would we be able to get a non-focused small money, whatever they're called? I forget what they're called.
Small development grant.
Small development grant.
I mean, maybe some sections of it. If we could find the right person, you could probably build a Sphinx gallery, meta gallery for 5k US.
I think that's the
biggest problem with the non-focused small dev grants is finding the right person to do the work. Because you have to be set up in a specific way to be able to take $5,000 of money and do something useful with it.
Because I'm going to say that's the most successful piece of funding we've had for SunPy. I think it's been outside of GSOC.
Outside of GSOC, which is just a really elaborate way of motivating maintainers to do a load of work.
So maybe I should. So I put funding down on the agenda, and I guess I thought it would be good to review what funding we currently had as a project and had been successful getting, and discuss like if there is a long-term plan, because clearly there is a need for long-term funding, right?
I think starting that with 6 minutes to go at the end
absolutely
might not be the best use of anyone's
I mean, I can answer the first
concentration.
question, which is, as far as I'm aware, this is the only direct source of fundings we've had to SunPy is GSOC, ESA Summer of Code, and 2 non-focused small development grants. Other than that, it's been people's
Don't
time.
forget SPD funds. Nobody's been claiming those, but we allocate them every year.
Yeah, I think we've been. Yeah, there's some discussion about exactly what we want to use those to, but we haven't put those towards development. They pay for things like the AAS workshop and stuff, at least. So that's
I'll just throw in that the Rose's proposal is still pending, I guess. 5+ months, no announcement.
I can't remember how much documentation stuff we put in that. There was a whole section of it towards
There
the
was.
end, right?
Yeah. It's a healthy chunk of the tasks.
And there's Google Summer of Docs as well, which we hastily and hence unsuccessfully applied for last year. But that's something that we could try and put a bit more time into. When's that? October or something?
It's true, actually. It's not that far, probably not that far off again, is it? Once again, we ask, how is it 2021?
I guess the other thing I was quickly wondering about is whether we should more widely advertise the fact that SunPy isn't funded, like maybe in our documentation or on the SunPy website.
Yeah, you
Start a
need
Patreon for SunPy.
I mean, there is GitHub sponsors. If, in all seriousness, if you do want to throw dollars at SunPy, we do take donations, either through GitHub sponsors or directly to non-focus.
I mean, we only take donations so Steve can see the positive money.
Sure,
It's
but
not
I'm kind
really
of
Steve anymore, but yeah.
I'm kind of thinking on the bigger scale. There are people in the solar physics community and the wider astrophysics community that do make long-term decisions about how stuff like this is funded.
Sure.
And I think there is a question to be asked about how do we effectively make them aware that there's a need for funding in this area. And
yeah, well, I mean, the Rose's discussion. The Rose's call that we proposed to was the first inkling that any large agency with actual serious money cares, because it was a call specifically for, we will give you money to maintain existing software, which was pretty magic. So
I mean, for a much broader scope like that, we could think about submitting a white paper to the decadal survey, which are due, I think, sometime in the fall, later in the fall, I believe. I mean, if we want to make a case for that long term, then I think we should think pretty seriously about that.
We should 100% do that. Like, I think it'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, I got an email this morning asking me to do a similar thing for the UK funding agencies in the next 2 weeks. So I need to do that. David, I will be messaging you about that tomorrow. Matthew?
Yeah, just a quick one. Has anyone actually gone back to some of our more senior scientists and asked how SolarSoft was initially set up and funded? And can we pursue similar avenues?
I don't know about like the beginning. Well, I think my understanding was the beginning of SolarSoft was all instrument funding.
And okay,
but it's been a long time since I've spoken to anybody about that, so I could be wrong.
Might be interesting to see if whatever missions are funded in future, whether there can be a I don't know, a SunPy contribution kind of added. Attacks. There you go. That's the word.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you can prove that a lot of research and mission instrument teams are using it, it does become an interesting question for the funding agencies on how they want to fund that, right? Is it NASA gives you money every few years when you ask for it, and then all of their science uses it, or is it, a few $1,000s on each grant proposal that goes in,
But I was it Will who was talking about decadal. Perhaps that is the way to go, because from what I'm hearing from this discussion is there's not a kind of legitimate funding source to actually go to get this actually funded.
There hasn't been, but there was the Rose's proposal, HDEE, switch from data archiving to software tools. So it may well be that we have already started to see a change in that direction, but it's all still fairly recent and has not had a significant impact on the sustainability of SunPy as of yet.
And we don't, there's nothing on the European side either. Like there's no equivalent of the HDE grants yet. ESA does have money, and with
does it though?
Oh no,
does it though?
I do mean that with Solar Orbiter, I mean, you might be able to hit them up for something, especially if you're in a underfunded country like Ireland, to get some money to do something. But yeah, I don't know.
I think, okay, as the last thing, we're out of time, so I think one of the interesting questions is how to get contributions at all, money or otherwise, from different sources, mission teams, researchers, right? Whether we're talking about money or time is almost irrelevant. It's a real struggle to get the priorities of those people aligned with the priorities of the SunPy team, who are currently at least almost entirely volunteers. So cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Tomorrow we're talking about map entirely. Cool. Today and tomorrow is a day about map and array data. We're going to talk about metadata and NDCube and how map is going to be upended by NDCube.
It's the headline bout of the week, I'd say. This is the
I
main
don't
event.
know. I don't know. I think the Fido session on Wednesday afternoon is really the prize fight this week.
I need to write all of
All
that.
the clients. All the clients.
I have forgotten I am speaking for most of Wednesday as well.
I mean, as far as that session goes, I will say that I have got some of the VSO team coming, and we should probably keep that should probably be mostly discussion, I think.
Well, yeah, I'm planning on having a very specific formulated opinion on that part, which Shane will probably be shaking his head at when he sees the slides.
And then there shall be fight. Cool.
I'd like to just also specifically thank Matt, and although he's just left, Craig for showing up, because I think influence and this perspective that they bring, is really valuable, and that we're not just all talking in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
So
both as instrument teams and reasonably new Python users are both very useful perspectives. So
yes, absolutely.
Well, we're starting to go into we've nearly finished our documentation phase, and we're going to be actively programming soon. So that's when you're going to be kind of like fed up of us, because we're going to be constantly coming to you saying, "How do we do this? What do we do here?"
We have many places you can ask questions.
Yeah. The map ND cube session. The map ND cube session would be really interesting for us, because we're having to combine with Punch, because we're having to combine in our nominal data pipeline. We're having to combine 4 images, four data sets, 4 arrays, and we were originally looking to kind of build our own little bit of code to do this, and then we see ND cube is perhaps going to be the way we're going, but we need to make sure that it can carry non-WCS extra metadata and things like that. So for me, this is going to be the interesting one.
So I'm very happy to chat to you about that more specifically, your needs on that one. But yeah, the focus for tomorrow's session is specifically, it's probably a bit more technical than general on NDCube. We're going to be talking about what changes are required to map to make use of NDCube.
You kind of how fast. Depending how fast we get through that, maybe there is time for a quick, Q&A at the end.
Okay.
But we should. Yeah. I was just saying we should make maybe separate to this meeting. If that's what you're excited about, then either myself or Stuart or both should make time to have like a very specific conversation with you guys about that, because I'd love to get more specific feedback from instrument teams on what your needs specifically are. So brilliant. Sure. We'll make that happen, whether it's tomorrow or not.
But I'll give you just a question to think about for tomorrow, and you may not have an answer for this. And we're going into producing our software soon, and I just heard you say that you're perhaps going to be releasing NDQ v 2.0.
Yep.
That scares me a little bit, because I want to know how this is going to fit in with the production of the pipeline. Because if the release of this and then all the debugging means it's going to be fully released in 2 years, then that's not going to fit in with our pipeline.
I will just say that most of the NDCube development, certainly from my side, has been funded because of the DKIST user tools are using it, and the DKIST is starting observations in November. So if it's not finished by November, I'm getting fired. So it's probably fine.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, that's excellent. But that was going to be one of my questions for tomorrow. But look forward to it then.
I mean, we've been working on NDCube for 2 years at this point, so I'm hoping the amount of bugs is falling already.
Sure.
Anyway, right, I'm going to shut this down. I mean, if people want